Chapter 345. After experiencing so many things at this moment, what the guests were thinking about had nothing to do with the birthday banquet. They didn't expect the Li family to be so secretive. They didn't know when they had the support of the royal family. That eldest grandson who had left home for 20 years seemed to have a good relationship with the crown prince and even the princess. What happened that year? Was it really just the eldest son of the Li family eloping with someone else? Were there other secrets? After tonight, what would the Qin family who had a grudge against the Li family do? Was the Li family behind the banishment of the capital's magistrate Qin Yu? What happened tonight was too shocking and far exceeded their expectations. The guests were brainstorming. The face of the master's wife, Madame Fong, had turned from gloomy to pale. Her nephew, who had no background, suddenly had the support of the crown prince and the princess. She had originally looked down on them, but now she had to look up to them. The psychological difference was so great that it was like falling from heaven to hell. Even if she had the support of her maiden family, she still felt a deep sense of helplessness. When Madame Fong was in a trance and sat on her seat with lifeless eyes, the guard of the princess's residence looked at Li Yi with a smile and asked, "The princess asked me to ask Li, is the gift from the princess's residence to Li's satisfaction?" Li Yi had to admit that although Li Xian and Mingzhu's actions would bring him some trouble, it was the most suitable method. Ever since he saw the Qin family's daughter that day, Li Yi knew that there was no turning back for the Qin family and the Li family. He could return to Qing'an Prefecture and the Li family's hands would not be able to reach there. However, the Li family in the capital would have to face the House of Duke's revenge. The difference in power between the two families was too great. The Li family would not be the last one to persevere. A crown prince and a princess should be enough to make the Qin family afraid. The bigger the family, the more scruples they had. They would not offend someone they could not afford to offend just for this matter. Now that his worries had been resolved, Li Yi looked at the man and asked, "What else did the princess say?" The man smiled and said, "The princess also said that it is impossible to fulfill all the rewards that Li wants, but a discount is still possible." "Discount?" Li Yi was puzzled. "What do you mean?" "This. Her Highness didn't say." The man shook his head and said, "His Highness only said these 2 sentences. As for the rest, Li will ask His Highness next time." While he was pondering over what Mingzhu meant, there was a sudden commotion in front of him. In the next moment, most of the guests stood up. Li Yi's eyebrows twitched. "No way again." He counted with his fingers. Other than the old monk Li Xian and Mingzhu, he really didn't know anyone else in the capital. Since there was such a big commotion in front of him, could it be that the Qin family came to make trouble? Unless the Qin family was crazy, the dignified state duke wouldn't do such a shameful thing. Thousands of thoughts went through Li Yi's mind. When he heard that sharp and thin voice which was neither yin nor yang, "Where is Li Yi? Come out quickly to receive the imperial edict." His face suddenly turned pale. "It's over, everything is over. One should not be afraid of thieves stealing, but one should be afraid of thieves remembering." Being remembered by the king of a country was not a good thing. Li Yi sat down on the chair and had the urge to let Rui take him away from this place. Without anyone's order, everyone immediately stood up from their seats and stood on both sides to form a passage. At the end of the passage was where Li Yi was. 2 eunuchs walked along the passage with their heads held high and said in a sharp voice, "County Lieutenant Li, receive the imperial edict." Li Yi raised his head and saw the 2 familiar eunuchs again. "What are you waiting for? Kneel down and receive the imperial edict." Li Mingzhu walked over quickly and urged. The situation was not in his favor. Li Yi could only bend his knees helplessly. Everyone present, including second uncle Li Mingzhu and the old madam, knelt down with a crash. The little fatty didn't understand. He raised his head and looked around but was quickly pressed down by his mother. The imperial edict states, Anshi County Lieutenant Li Yi improved interrogation by torture, created horseshoes, invented cardiopulmonary resuscitation and stitched up wounds. He blessed the common people and blessed the people. He offered a divine object from heaven's punishment, defeated the Qi army and expanded the territory. The emperor conferred upon you the title of Prince of Chang'an. You will be crowned with honor and forever blessed by the heavens. Note, this Chang'an is not Chang'an. I really can't think of a better name. The eunuch said a lot of tongue-twisting words. Li Yi could only understand the first and the last few sentences. The gist of it was that he had done so many things before and all the credit had been accumulated by him. This time he would be rewarded together. He would no longer be the Anxi County lieutenant and no longer return to the Qing'an prefecture. The emperor had given him a piece of land in Chang'an. From then on, Li Yi would stay there and be a small county magistrate. From then on he would truly enter the ranks of the nobles. Chang'an and the capital were neighbors. Maybe Li Yi could see the city walls from his fief. The change from a duke to a county magistrate was not mentioned. He didn't mention tens of thousands of gold coins or thousands of hectares of fertile land. This discount was a bit too much. At this moment, Li Yi's mood calmed down. It seemed that the emperor also knew that he wasn't cut out to be an official. He just wanted him to be a parasite in society. In fact, he had long known that this day would come. He had always been unwilling to face it. This time he might not be able to avoid it. The eunuch squeezed a smile on his face and said, "County Magistrate Li, accept the imperial edict." Seeing that Li Yi didn't respond, Li Mingzi suppressed the shock in his heart. He pulled his sleeve and said in a low voice, "Don't just stand there. Accept the imperial edict." The eunuch handed the imperial edict to Li Yi respectfully and said, "His Majesty has spoken. County Magistrate Li is summoned to the palace tomorrow. Tomorrow morning someone from the palace will be sent to pick you up." The eunuch came and went quickly. He left the Li family directly, leaving behind his nobility robe and other belongings. He also messed up Madame Dowager's birthday banquet. Now no one cared about Madame Dowager's birthday. The eldest grandson of the Li family had been conferred nobility by His Majesty. He was the county magistrate of Chang'an. The head of the Li family, Li Mingzi, was also just a county magistrate. In the Jing kingdom, nobility could not be conferred without military merits. It was the first time that His Majesty had made an exception to confer nobility. What kind of luck did the Li family have? After so many years of decline, was it finally going to rise again? Everyone had heard the description in the imperial edict. They were very unfamiliar with the description. However, His Majesty was generous in praising Li Mingzi's contribution. Naturally, this matter couldn't be false. Congratulations, congratulations. One family with two nobles. Congratulations, Madame Dowager, congratulations, Assistant Minister Li. County Magistrate Li has been favored by His Majesty at such a young age. His future is limitless. When they calmed down, everyone came forward to congratulate them. Madame Dowager's smile was unprecedentedly bright. Although Li Mingzi was still shocked, he couldn't hide the smile on his face. County Magistrate Li of Chang'an, County Magistrate Li of Chang'an. Madame Fong, who was sitting in a seat behind everyone, murmured to herself with a pale face. Chapter 346. First, it was the highly respected Buddhist master. Then it was the crown prince of Ning with a powerful background. Next, it was the noble princess of a country. Finally, even the emperor's imperial edict arrived. The eldest grandson of the Li family, who had just been appointed as the county magistrate of Chang'an by the emperor, instantly became the center of attention. No one cared about the 60th birthday anymore. Li Yi felt guilty about this, but the old woman didn't care at all. In fact, she was even happier than before. It was as if this matter was more important than her 60th birthday. This was not surprising. After the founding of the country, although the country had been in turmoil for decades, it was generally stable. It was almost impossible to rely on military merits to earn a title of nobility. At most, they would be rewarded with land. The emperor had been on the throne for more than 10 years and had intentionally reduced the number of titles. There were very few people who were awarded titles. It was the first time in recent years that someone was awarded the title of Viscount in Jing County. The meaning behind this was self-evident. For the sake of the continuation of the Li family, the old woman couldn't give him more. She couldn't help but feel guilty. Looking at it now, how could what the Li family could give him compare to the emperor's favor? What could be better than receiving the emperor's favor? After making such a big scene at the old woman's birthday banquet, Li Yi was naturally drowned in all kinds of questions. Of course, this included what happened between him, the crown prince, and the princess. The imperial edict talked about all the contributions, and what exactly did they mean? Li Yi had only briefly explained how he had met the crown prince and the princess in Qing, in Fu, and the few things he had unintentionally done. He had not expected them to be so useful to the country. As for chatting with the emperor in the garden and pulling him back from the gates of hell for their sake, Li Yi did not mention a word about it. Li Mingze and the others only knew that Li Yi's position as county lieutenant was personally conferred by His Majesty, but they did not delve into it. The current His Majesty cherished talents, and because of one article, many poor students were granted special permission to enter officialdom. They only thought of this as one of the many. However, with the arrival of the imperial edict, everyone finally understood how much importance the emperor placed on him. He was only a 20-year-old viscount. No one knew how far he would go in the future. The Li family was still too small for him. Li Mingze thought for a moment and looked at Li Yi. I was hesitating before whether I should leave the position of master to you in the future. Now it seems that for the sake of the Li family, it is indeed the most suitable for you to be the master of the family. Madame Fang's expression changed when she heard this, but she only lowered her head and didn't speak. Things were different now. Even if her husband gave up the position of the Li family head to a county magistrate who was not even 20 years old, no one in the Li family would object. Old Madame's expression did not change. She looked at Li Yi as well, obviously supporting her son's decision. At the same table, the core figures of the Li family weren't surprised by the words of the master. If a family wanted to survive and maintain its prosperity, it needed the unremitting efforts of the master of each generation. Although Li Minghan was the eldest son, he wouldn't be a good master. It could be seen from the fact that he eloped with an ordinary girl without caring about the family. If it weren't for the painstaking efforts of the current master, the Li family would have declined a long time ago, far worse than it was now. The younger generation of the Li family, including the son of the master, didn't have any outstanding figures. They didn't have the ability to lead the Li family to glory again, and they didn't even have the ability to maintain the status quo. At this time, handing the future of the Li family to Li Yi, who was favored by the emperor and had a close relationship with the royal family, was obviously the best choice. Moreover, he was the eldest grandson of the Li family. Everything was justified. Neither outsiders nor members of the Li family had the right to criticize him. Lu Rui looked at the crowd and then at Li Yi. Seeing that the atmosphere was unusually quiet, he pulled back his chopsticks. Being stared at by everyone, Li Yi suddenly smiled and said, "Second uncle, I was born in Qing and Fu and grew up in Qing and Fu. Actually, before coming to the capital, I only wanted to wait for grandmother's birthday and then immediately return. I never thought about becoming the head of the Li family. If it weren't for the emperor's imperial edict, I would have left in 2 days at most." Madame Fang heard this and raised her head slightly. Disbelief flashed through her eyes. Li Mingze still wanted to say something, but Li Yi said again, "I am the same as my father. We are not suited to be the master. If the Li family falls into my hands, I'm afraid it will decline even faster. Second uncle is in the prime of his life. Under your management, the Li family will not decline. As for the future, that should be the matter of Yingjie and Yingkai." Li Yi wasn't being modest. He liked to live a simple life of daily necessities. With Rui Rui and Xiaohuan, anywhere was home. He was confident that he could live such a life well. As for being the master of a large family, he had to rack his brains and sweat for the rise and fall of the family every day. He would probably die of old age in less than 2 years. What meaning was there in such a life? It was even scarier than the mutual deception in the officialdom. To be able to manage the Li family to this extent under the pressure of Duke Chen's Fu, this second uncle of his was the most suitable person to do this. For the sake of the Li family and for his own sake, Li Yi felt that he needed to say these words first. Madame Fang raised her head and stared dazedly at Li Yi. The shock in her eyes deepened. He had never thought about being the master of the Li family. He had never thought about taking away everything that should have belonged to him from them. If that was the case, then all the things she had done in his eyes were actually many jokes. The title of nobility, the emperor's favor, the friendship with the heir, the princess, and even great master Tan Yin. These things were far more important than the Li family. He could easily obtain them. It was a pity that she still deeply thought that he had designs on the Li family. After completely letting out a sigh of relief in her heart, Madame Fang lowered her head again. Her face was completely red. She wished that there was a hole in the ground to crawl into. Li Mingze frowned slightly. Li Yi's words were very firm. Not only would he not be the master now, he would not be in the future. Heroes and talents were all mediocre. After his 100 years, the Li family's decline was already inevitable. Unless, in his lifetime, he could bring the Li family to another level. However, this matter was almost impossible in his hands. A viscount in name was far inferior to the county of Xi that the emperor had personally conferred. If his title of nobility could be raised again, the status of the Li family would also rise. However, the premise of all this was that he was willing to become the master of the Li family. Looking at Li Yi's smiling face and his unusually firm attitude, Li Mingzi didn't say anything more. This matter needed to be considered at length. Chapter 347. You haven't learned anything else, but you've completely learned your father's lazy personality. The old mistress looked at him and smiled. Forget it. Your second uncle can still stay in this position for a few more decades. It's fine if you don't want it. But don't forget, no matter what, this is your home. Looking at the old mistress's loving smile, Li Yi felt warmth in his heart. Although he lacked the passionate affection for the Li family, the old mistress and the others treated him like family. He couldn't become the head of the Li family, but he wouldn't sit back and watch the Li family decline. No matter how grand a banquet was, it would come to an end. Late at night, the guests gradually dispersed. Li Yi sat alone in the corridor, staring at the sky in a daze. Regarding all of this, he was more or less mentally prepared. Luckily, Rui and Xiaohuan were almost here. As long as they were here for him, whether he was in Qing'an or Jing City, it didn't make much of a difference. Living a carefree life was something people yearned for. No one had ever realized it. Although it was annoying to be remembered by the princess and the emperor, it wasn't without its benefits. In the past, even if he sold candied haws or bottles of Rui nectar on the street, there would be people looking for trouble. Now that he had the title of county lieutenant or county magistrate, at least he could sell candied haws and Rui nectar with peace of mind. The only difference was that the location had changed from Qing'an prefecture to the capital. Unfortunately, there was still more than half a year left on the lease for Rui workshop. If the whole family moved here, wouldn't the money be wasted? Other than that, there was also the theater that had been opened all over Qing'an prefecture. The assets that he had spent half a year building were all in Qing'an prefecture. Now he had to start all over again in the capital. With the title of nobility and a large mansion, there would definitely be no lack of maids and servants. At the very least, he should hire a few guards. Li Yi felt as if he could see money being spent like water. It wasn't easy to feed so many people with the salary given by the court. Money. It had been a long time since he had a lack of money. Are we not going back? Mississippi Lu sat on the wall, swinging her legs and looking up at the sky as well. Who said that? It's just a house in the capital. You can go back whenever you want and stay as long as you want. The magistrate was not a hostage or a criminal. His personal freedom was not restricted. As long as he didn't hide in Qing'an and not return to the capital, there shouldn't be any problems. After we move in, I want to pick a courtyard first. After a long time, Mississippi Lu's voice came again. No problem, you can choose first. Li Yi stood up and walked to the wall. He raised his head and said, however, in return, shouldn't you repay me a little? For example, Mississippi Lu bent her legs and narrowed her beautiful eyes. She held the hilt of her sword and looked down at him. Like what? For example, I don't have to pay you back the 50 taels of silver I owe you. Li Yi looked at her and said. It's 100 taels, Mississippi Lu reminded. You agree. I disagree. Then there's nothing to talk about. As usual. Mississippi Lu jumped down from the wall and threw the sword in her hand to him. Make your move. Mississippi Lu was a very principled person. As long as Li Yi could defeat her, she would never say no to Li Yi's decision. Unfortunately, they had used this method many times and Li Yi had never won even once. The next morning, a servant from the Li family came to inform him that someone from the palace had arrived. Yesterday, the eunuch who delivered the imperial edict said that he had to enter the palace this morning, but he didn't expect it to be this early. Li Yi put on the nobility robe with sleepy eyes. It fit him perfectly and looked better than the county officer's robe. The material seemed to be more exquisite as well. He left the Li family surrounded by the old mistress and the others. Until now, Li Yi knew nothing other than that he had been given the title of a county officer and that his fief was not far from the capital in Chang'an district. He had slept late last night after fighting with Mississippi Lu, so he was woken up early in the morning. He sat in the palanquin drowsily. The old emperor was quite considerate and had laid out a comfortable bed in the palanquin. The only problem was that the space was a little small and he had to curl up his legs to lie down. But at least there was a place to sleep. Not long after, Li Yi went back to sleep. The palanquin rocked rhythmically and comfortably. The swaying of the sedan chair was rhythmic and comfortable. In a daze, Li Yi only remembered that after he entered the palace, the old emperor had entrusted him with an important task and rewarded him with a lot of things. The silver was piled up like a mountain, and he was rewarded with 10 beautiful maids. In his excitement, Li Yi did his best to assist the emperor in governing the Jing kingdom, eliminating internal and external troubles and quelling rebellions. He single-handedly facilitated the Jing kingdom to go through 2 industrial revolutions. The strength of the country was unprecedentedly strong, and its prestige subdued the 4 barbarians, allowing the Jing kingdom to complete an unprecedented unification. Later, before Emperor Jing died, he was conferred the title of prince with a different surname. There seemed to be something wrong. He was second only to the emperor and above tens of thousands of people, and then he woke up. He impatiently slapped away the eunuch's hand that was shaking his shoulder, wiped off his saliva and walked out of the palanquin. He immediately felt refreshed and had a good sleep. County Magistrate Li were here. The eunuch's smile was very kind. Li Yi looked around and found that he was in a rather spacious courtyard. There was a row of rooms opposite him and people were coming in and out frequently. No matter how he looked at it, it didn't look like the place where the emperor lived. Where is this? Li Yi looked back at the eunuch and asked. Did he come to the wrong place? Food Distribution Bureau, the eunuch replied. Food Distribution Bureau? Li Yi looked at the clothes of the people coming in and out and immediately understood that this should be a place similar to the imperial kitchen. The smell coming out of the room was quite fragrant. Not bad, the old emperor actually knew how to be humane. He knew that Li Yi hadn't had breakfast and specially asked someone to bring him to the imperial kitchen to fill his stomach. In an instant, the emperor's good impression in Li Yi's heart went up a level. Well, what kind of breakfast do you provide here? Li Yi asked a random servant. It was not easy to come to the imperial palace. The imperial chefs in the imperial palace should be almost the world's top chefs. The food they made would definitely taste good. He wanted to take this opportunity to have a good look. He just didn't know if he could take it away and let Rui and the little fatty try it when he got back. The servant who was stopped by Li Yi looked dull and didn't know how to answer. He also didn't dare to speak carelessly because he couldn't afford to offend a person wearing such clothes. Ahem, County Magistrate Li, you didn't come here to eat, the eunuch said after coughing twice. Why did you bring me here if not to eat? Li Yi frowned and asked. You're here. Hurry up and make me hot pot. A bouncing figure came in from outside. When she saw Li Yi, her eyes immediately turned into a crescent moon. Greetings, princess. When the little girl walked over, a large number of people immediately knelt down. Li Yi was now a nobleman, so he didn't need to kneel when he saw the princess. He resisted the urge to pinch her face and said, If you want to eat hot pot, go to your brother Xian's place. I still have business to attend to. I won't. Princess Xianxing's little face turned and said, My royal sister and brother Xian said that your hot pot is better. County Magistrate Li, the eunuch looked at Li Yi with a smile and said, Your business is to cook for the princess. This is His Majesty's order. Li Yi's expression froze when he heard that. He asked him to get up early in the morning just to make hot pot for this little girl? What exactly was the old emperor thinking? Was a viscount supposed to cook for the royal family? In ancient times, King Yu of Zhou used beacons to make fun of the feudal vassals for a smile, which led to the destruction of the country. Today, Emperor Jing summoned the county magistrate of Chong into the palace just for a hot pot. Such a fatuous emperor was like a second King Yu of Zhou. The Jing kingdom would be destroyed sooner or later. Chapter 348. I'm going to listen to the teacher's lecture. I'll be back in 2 hours. Don't be lazy. I want the hot pot to be ready when I come back. After Princess Xianxing finished speaking, she ran out in a hurry. Several eunuchs and palace maids chased after her with pale faces. Li Yi sat on a stone bench in the courtyard with a gloomy expression on his face. Anyone who was disturbed from a good dream would not be in a good mood to come here early in the morning just to cook. The eunuch reminded him, County Magistrate Li, this is the order of His Majesty. You can't neglect the princess. All right. I got it. You can go and do your own things. Li Yi waved his hand impatiently and said. It was still early. He had 2 hours to find a place to catch up on sleep. As for cooking, he could do it in an hour. It's my duty to follow County Magistrate Li, the eunuch said with a smile. The eunuch's voice was sharp and thin. It was neither a man nor a woman. It was quite uncomfortable to listen to it. His smile was gloomy. No wonder most of the eunuchs in literary works were not good people. With such good qualities, it would be a pity if he did not become a bad person. Then take me out for a walk. Li Yi did not plan to catch up on sleep. He had fallen asleep in the sedan and did not have the chance to see what the palace looked like. If he did not take a day trip to the palace, he would feel sorry for waking up so early. The eunuch said with a fake smile, I'm sorry, County Magistrate Li. You can't go anywhere except here. The palace was not a vegetable market where anyone could stroll around. Without an identity card, he would be caught by the guards within 2 steps. While he was disturbed from a good dream. Now he had no freedom and his stomach was empty. Perhaps the old emperor did not think of feeding him. His impression in Li Yi's heart suddenly became negative. He got up from the stone bench and strode into a room with a fragrant smell. The eunuch did not follow him in. He knew that the county magistrate was already very dissatisfied with him. He did not dare to get into trouble again. He had been in the palace for more than a decade, but this was the first time he had seen His Majesty order a viscount around as a cook. Thunder, rain, and dew were all grace from the heavens. Why didn't His Majesty find someone else, but chose this newly appointed county magistrate? This wasn't a punishment but a grace. Li Yi didn't think that being a cook for others was a grace. He was willing to cook for his own family. If being forced to cook was considered a grace, then who would want such a lousy grace? Finding something to fill his stomach was what he should be doing right now. On the table in the middle of the room, there were many bowls and plates, and the rich aroma was coming from there. Sir, you can't touch the things here. You can't touch them. Just as Li Yi was about to open one to take a look, a chubby man ran over and said while huffing and puffing, Who are you? Li Yi glanced at him and asked. Lord Zhu, this lowly official is still in charge of the food bureau. The man smiled apologetically. The head chef of the food bureau was also the head chef of the royal restaurant. No wonder he was so fat. It seemed that he had made a lot of money over the years. Lord Zhu, you can't touch this. This is the osmanthus cake that Consort Yen wants. Speaking of osmanthus cake, Li Yi felt his mouth salivate. It had been a long time since he had eaten the osmanthus cake that Ruoqing made. He missed it very much. Seeing this, Lord Zhu's hand reach down, the head chef's heart couldn't help but jump. He said, Lord Zhu, you can't touch it. You can't touch this either. This is for Consort Yen and will be sent over immediately. The head chef's face was covered in a cold sweat. If he delayed Consort Yan's time, he wouldn't be able to withstand being chopped off even if he had 10 heads. Consort Yen couldn't be offended and neither could Consort Yen. Li was annoyed. He looked at the head chef and asked, What do you have here that Consort Yen doesn't want? Quickly bring it over for me. The head chef smiled bitterly and said, No. The food bureau was in charge of the meals in the palace. Only those consorts, princesses and princes could enjoy this privilege. He was only a head chef. Without His Majesty's edict, how could he dare to let people eat here? The higher-ups only said that Princess Xianxia's meals were taken over by someone else. They were allowed to do as they pleased here, but no one told them how. He was only a small head chef. He couldn't afford to offend either side. How could he live like this? Seeing that this Lord Zhu was reaching for the next one, the head chef hurriedly said, This is Princess Yongla's soup. Lord Zhu, you mustn't. Princess Yongla's? Li Yi was startled. He finally met someone he could afford to offend. He straightforwardly opened the lid and used a spoon to taste it. He nodded in satisfaction and said, The taste isn't bad. I'll take this. You can make another portion for the princess. Plop. The head chef's legs softened and he fell to the ground. This kind of soup would take at least 4 hours. How could he make it in time to make it now? Seeing that the head chef was frightened, Li Yi comforted him. Don't worry. I'll talk to Her Highness. It's none of your business. as expected of an imperial chef. His skill in cooking soup was probably on par with Li Yi's. Li Yi was hungry to begin with. Soon a small bowl of soup was down his stomach. Head chef Han, is the princess's white fungus and lotus seed soup ready? A clear voice sounded. A maid dressed in palace attire walked in from outside. Yes. Li Yi wiped his mouth and replied. He pointed to the soup that was still more than half left. You. The maid saw a small bowl and spoon with traces left. She suddenly widened her eyes and said angrily, "How dare you?" The little maid gritted her teeth so hard that they were about to break. Her Highness had the habit of drinking a bowl of white fungus and lotus seed soup after practice every morning. This guy who came out of nowhere was really bold. He even dared to steal the princess's soup. It's just a bowl of soup. Do you have to do that? Your princess used to freeload from me many times. Just take it as returning the favor of that bowl of egg-fried rice. Li Yi said indifferently. When they were in Qing'an Prefecture, a prince, a princess and 2 members of the royal family, they had always been frequent customers of Rui Lane. Not only did they not care about the business, but they were always treated with good wine and delicious food. They would wipe their mouths and leave after eating. Her Highness was not so stingy as to drink a bowl of lotus seed soup from her. You wait for me. The maid glared at Li Yi fiercely and left angrily. The head chef got up from the ground, patted the dust off his body and was ready to do his own business. He could see that this was a matter between this lord and Her Highness. As a small head chef, it was better for him not to intervene. Ignoring the little maid who ran out, Li Yi picked up the spoon and filled a bowl for himself. Although the white fungus and lotus seed soup was delicious, the bowl in the palace was too small. After one bowl it couldn't even fill the bottom. Chapter 349. Clang. Gold and iron collided with each other and sparks flew everywhere. The gray-haired old woman retreated a few steps. After stabilizing her body, she looked at the figure in front of her and said with a smile, "I'm getting old. It seems that I can no longer accompany the princess in the future." Immerse sheathed her sword and shook her head. "Nanny, you don't have to go easy on me." The old woman shook her head with a smile and said, "Her Highness is talented and diligent in practicing. You are advancing at a rapid pace. This old woman is really no match for you." The old woman looked at the tall and obviously grown-up girl in front of her and couldn't help but sigh. 10 years had passed in a flash. The little princess who could only grit her teeth and use non-standard moves was now able to stand on her own. Even the old woman was no match for her. Princess, the white fungus and lotus seed soup has been stolen." The little palace maid ran all the way and said while panting. "Slow down, what happened?" Immerse walked over and said softly. Just now I went to the food bureau to get the white fungus and lotus seed soup, but when I got there the soup had already been drunk." The little palace maid covered her chest and said angrily. "Who did it?" The old woman came over and asked. It was not uncommon for the imperial harem to fight and scheme against each other, but it had never involved the princess. This was the first time such a thing had happened. The little palace maid shook her head and said, "I don't know his identity, but he said that it was the princess's way of returning the favor for the bowl of egg-fried rice." Egg-fried rice. Immerse was stunned for a moment, then she smiled and said, "Okay, I got it. You can go now." The little palace maid nodded and watched the princess go out of the hall. When she walked towards the direction of the food bureau, a smile appeared on her face. That rude guy will definitely taste the bitterness. So bitter. After biting a lotus seed, Li Yi frowned. The chefs in the imperial palace were also careless. It was obvious that he forgot to remove the core of the lotus seed he just swallowed. "Why are you here?" A voice came from behind. Li Yi turned around, raised the bowl in his hand and gestured to her. "Do you want a bowl? It's my treat." The eunuchs in the courtyard immediately hid far away. They seemed to understand why His Majesty treated Li Xianxia differently. There were many viscounts in the capital, but he was the only one who dared to speak to the princess like this. "I only found out about father's decision yesterday. I was going to tell you in advance, but father sent someone to pass the decree last night. Thinking about it, it doesn't make much difference." Immerse looked at him and said, "I will talk to Imperial Father about the Xianxia Bureau. Don't take Xianxia's nonsense to heart." "Forget it." Li Yi waved his hand. In fact, he felt more relaxed this way. Cooking a few dishes and making a hot pot were much better than doing other errands. Compared with the 3 provinces and 6 ministries or the front line of the army, Li Yi felt that this place was more suitable for him. At least the soup of the Xianxia bureau was better. Li Mingzhu looked at the way he was concentrating on drinking the soup and her heart was slightly at ease. She had originally thought that he would be dissatisfied with being forced to stay in Jing by her imperial father, but now it seemed that he didn't seem to have any resistance towards it. For some reason, after drinking 2 bowls of soup, not only did he not feel full, he felt even hungrier. I'm going to make some egg fried rice. Do you want some? Li Yi got up and patted his butt. He looked at Mingzhu and asked. Her Highness nodded and expressed her approval of Li Yi's proposal. She hadn't eaten egg fried rice for a long time. The steward of the food bureau watched in amazement as this lord used white rice and eggs to quickly make 2 plates of fragrant food. He was eating with Her Royal Highness outside and began to worry about his position as the steward of the food bureau. It's a pity that there's no wine. Eating the egg fried rice, Her Highness looked a little regretful. Since ancient times, Li Yi had only known one person who ate egg fried rice with wine. There's no wine in the palace? Li asked. Then he realized that she was talking about the liquor from Rui Distillery. There might be no shortage of good wine in the palace, but based on the current technology, it couldn't reach the level of distillation and purification. Speaking of liquor, Li Yi realized that in today's world, the only liquor production workshop was in Xianxia Prefecture. Although there were other places, they were all from Xianxia Prefecture. Naturally, the price was much higher. The capital was obviously an undeveloped treasure land. If a few liquor workshops could be opened here, it would undoubtedly be building a home on a golden mountain. Moreover, the distance between the capital and Xianxia Prefecture was so far that it wouldn't affect each other's business. Not only that, Ruidu perfume and soap could all be used as a way to make a fortune. There were many more local tycoons in the capital than in Xianxia Prefecture. How could they be afraid of not being able to support a family? To do business in this kind of place, the first thing to do was not to open a shop or build a workshop but to curry favor. The capital was not like Xianxia Prefecture. There were nobles everywhere. A small viscount was nothing. There were at least 80 if not 100 in the capital. If one of them became jealous, Li Yi wouldn't be able to handle it. Li Yi looked at his thighs, looked at Her Highness and said, how about we partner up to do the liquor business in the capital? At that time you can drink whenever you want and as much as you want. Regarding Li Yi's proposal, Her Highness didn't think for long before agreeing. First, it was because she did like that kind of liquor, but it could only be bought in Xianxia Prefecture. It was very rare in the capital. Second, she also knew that this business was very profitable. Even she couldn't ignore it. However, the capital was deep. It was impossible for Li Yi to make it big on his own. If he could establish a relationship with the royal family, he could avoid this worry. Whether it was for business or personal reasons, she couldn't refuse this favor. What do you need? Just tell me. Having eaten and drunk her fill, Her Highness lightly left these words before leaving. Li Yi liked her straightforward attitude. She didn't say anything unnecessary. She didn't even talk about the distribution of profits. She was definitely someone he could trust in for a long-term partnership. As for the specifics of the partnership, it wasn't urgent. He would wait until Rui and Xiaohuan arrived and they had completely settled down. Speaking of which, the emperor had only given him a noble's robe and a token to prove his identity. Fiefdom, maids, servants and a large mansion, weren't these all standard requirements? Why hadn't he mentioned them? Hey little princess, why are you here? Where are the palace maids? Interrupted by the manager's words, Li Yi turned his head and saw a girl about 6 or 7 years old standing in the courtyard. She was dressed in palace attire. The little girl's attire was clearly not ordinary. She held a doll in her arms. It had a baby face and a blank expression. Her eyes were big, clear and bright, but there was no spirit in them. She didn't speak and stared straight into the room. Little princess, it's not time to eat yet. If you want to eat anything, just let me know. I'll send someone to bring it to you. The emperor was very strict with these little princesses and princes. There was even a fixed time for meals. The manager didn't dare to break the rules. Hearing the manager's words, the little girl didn't say a word. She turned and walked out with the doll in her arms. Chapter 350. Li Yi pointed at the little girl's back and turned to look at the steward of the food bureau. Which princess is this? He only knew two of the old emperor's princesses, the beautiful constable Princess Xianxia and the arrogant Princess Xianxia. He didn't know any of the princes. The little girl who looked a little silly just now was actually a princess? Lord Zhu, that is Princess Xianxia. The steward immediately replied. Li Yi realized that there was a huge gap between princesses. For example, Zhou Xian, the Tsundra Lolita, might be the most pampered type. In order to satisfy her desire to eat hot pot, the old emperor did not hesitate to let a viscount enter the palace to be the chef. As for the lonely Princess Xianxia, she might be the least pampered type. Li Yi turned his head and saw the corner of a robe peeking out from the stone steps at the entrance. Li Yi walked out slowly and saw the little girl sitting by the stone steps, hugging the doll in her arms. She was motionless and looked ahead with a blank expression. Coo! A strange noise was suddenly heard. Li Yi lowered his head to look at her, then walked back to the food station. When he came out again, he was holding a small bowl of egg-fried rice that was still steaming hot. As if she smelled the fragrance, the little girl turned her head and looked straight at Li Yi. For the first time, there was a glimmer of light in her bright eyes. This was the first time Li Yi saw an hungry princess. He squatted down and passed the bowl to her. The little girl instinctively dodged his action. Seeing that he didn't seem to have any ill intentions, she put the doll aside after a long time. She reached out to take the bowl and took small bites. Li Yi sat beside the little girl. The steward walked out and was about to say something when he was glared at by Li Yi. Just like that, one big and one small sat on the porch. One ate quietly while the other stared ahead in a daze. Hey, is my hot pot ready? A crisp voice pulled Li Yi back from his dazed state, and a tsundra little face appeared in front of him. Hot pot. Li was confused. What hot pot? The Lolita's face turned from red to green. The taste of the hot pot depended on the base. There was no Hidaleo in this world. Fortunately, it was easy to make a homemade hot pot base and didn't require much effort. The palace was a palace after all. Tender green vegetables weren't rare here. The variety of dishes wasn't something the prince's residence could compare to. Zhou Xian princess followed Li Yi like a shadow, asking him questions from time to time. It looked like she wanted to secretly learn from him. It was very noisy outside. The arrogant Lolita did not come alone. The princes and princesses were all attracted by the hot pot she mentioned. After the morning class, they followed behind her and swarmed over. A large group of eunuchs and palace maids guarded them. It seemed that His Majesty the Emperor was quite energetic when he was young, Li Yi thought to himself. He glanced outside and could not help but frown. At the door, a few princes and princesses surrounded the little girl and pushed her. The little girl didn't resist and just stood there in a daze, letting them bully her. Can you teach me how to make hot pot? That way I can make delicious food for father and mother. Princess Xianxia dipped her chopsticks in the hot pot and tasted it. She nodded in satisfaction and looked at Li Yi. Li Yi pointed outside and said, If you can stop them from bullying Xianxia, I'll teach you. Princess Xianxia was stunned for a moment. She didn't even hesitate and walked out with large strides. Among the group of princes and princesses, the proud Lolita was obviously the big sister. After a while she came back from outside. Li Yi glanced at them and saw that the group had already dispersed. The little girl, who was a little demented, was led out by two palace maids. Is that little girl really a princess? Li Yi asked while he was busy cooking. Yes. Princess Xianxia immediately replied. Between princesses one couldn't be compared. Xianxia and Xianxia were different by a word. One was the Emingzu in the palm of the old emperor, while the other could only be bullied by many princes and princesses. Thinking of the little girl's behavior just now, Li Yi asked again, Does she not know how to speak? No. Princess Xianxia shook her head and said, Xianxia used to know how to speak, but she fell seriously ill a year ago. The imperial doctors almost couldn't save her. I don't know what happened later, but she recovered. Since then I haven't seen her speak much. Xianxia's mother passed away early. She never played with us. My brothers and sisters don't like her. Princess Xianxia was very willing to talk to people who were willing to cook for her. You don't like her either? Li Yi put the onion and ginger slices into the pot and asked casually. The proud Lolita was silent for a while and said, Father said that a family should help each other. Xianxia is also my sister. It's not that I don't like her, but she never talks to me. I can't do anything about it. Li Yi looked at Princess Xianing with slight surprise. A 10-year-old girl could say something like this. It meant that the old emperor had educated her well. Although this little girl was a little proud, she wasn't bad at heart. It wasn't easy for a princess to grow up in the palace. The imperial court of the Li family continued the glory of the former Tang dynasty. The princesses of that era were extravagant and lascivious. They bullied the kind-hearted, raised handsome men and even caused chaos in the palace. Even revolts were not uncommon. Perhaps the imperial family of the Jing kingdom had learned their lesson and paid attention to the quality education of the imperial family's children. The arrogant little Lolita was even more so, a pure white lotus that had emerged from the mud. She was born into the royal family, so it was normal not to be arrogant. Li Yi's curiosity about Princess Yongning ended there. She lost her mother at a young age and suffered from a serious illness. It was normal for her to be autistic in a place like the palace where there wasn't much human touch. Li Yi had a friend with autism in his previous life. When he was in elementary school, she was a weak girl who never communicated with others. She just sat in her seat and stared blankly. As her desk mate, it took Li Yi half a semester to walk into her heart and become her only friend. He was his first friend of the opposite sex. Although she was transferred to another school by her parents in the second semester, Li Yi had a deep impression of her. That little girl who ate egg-fried rice without saying a word with a wooden expression easily evoked some of the precious memories buried deep in his heart. The beginning of spring had passed and the weather was getting warmer. However, it was still a little chilly. Eating hot pot in such weather was a good choice. Hot pot was a very magical thing. In the future, not only was it popular in China, but it was also very popular in Japan, Europe, and America. From ancient to modern, Chinese to foreign, as long as one ate it once, it was not easy to get rid of it. It was very obvious that eating this would cause one to become addicted. The princes and princesses huddled around the stove and made a big fuss. Even though they were scalded, they still kept stuffing the food into their mouths. The officials of the Foodstuff Bureau looked at each other in dismay. When had the food from the Foodstuff Bureau been so loved by these ancestors? Chapter 351. The princes and princesses were eating noisily, which annoyed Li Yi, but he couldn't reprimand them. Li Yi cleaned his hands and walked out to the courtyard. A trace of doubt emerged in his mind. Did the old emperor really ask him to come to the palace just to make him cook? At this moment, the eunuch stepped forward and said with a smile, "Count Li, the morning court has ended. Follow me to see His Majesty." Sure enough, although he was very free, the emperor should not be so free. Li Yi also wanted to see what the old emperor had up his sleeve. The effeminate eunuch took out a token from his sleeve and handed it to Li Yi, saying, "Count Li, keep this token. It is the proof of entering the palace. With it you can enter and leave the palace freely." Li Yi took the shining token and felt it sink in his hand. He couldn't help but think, this thing is actually made of gold? No wonder the royal family is so generous. A token is made of pure gold. If I have a few more, won't I become rich? At this moment, most of his attention was on the golden token, and he didn't notice that the eunuch beside him bowed even more when he saw the golden token. The security in the palace was really tight. The eunuch's name, identity, and physical characteristics were engraved clearly on the token. The possibility of it being a fake was too small. After putting away the token, Li Yi turned around and saw the eunuch's flattering smile. He frowned and opened his mouth to say something, only to remember that he didn't know the eunuch's name. "What's your name?" The eunuch smiled and said, "Lord Zhu, you can call me Wei Zhong." "Wei Zhong?" Li Yi was stunned and blurted out, "Who is Wei Xian to you?" The eunuch looked puzzled, then shook his head and said, "Wei Xian? I've never heard of him." Li found it funny. Even if they were in the same time and space, there was a difference of hundreds or thousands of years. Moreover, they were in different worlds. How could there be any connection? "Wei Zhong, what are your orders, Lord Zhu?" Li Yi looked at the eunuch's feminine smile and couldn't help but shiver. He had goosebumps and said, "Don't smile in front of me in the future." Wei Zhong was speechless. The imperial palace was really huge. There were all kinds of palaces that Li Yi had never even heard of before. There were countless arches and corridors. If it wasn't for Wei Zhong leading the way, he would definitely get lost. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, his field of vision suddenly widened. The occasion to meet the old emperor was not grand at all. It was not even in the palace or the study. He walked into a garden full of evergreen trees, walked past two groups of imperial bodyguards with stern faces, and went up to a pavilion. Then he saw Emperor Jing in a yellow robe. Compared to when he was in Ning Wang Fu, Jing Di's complexion was worse, but there were more smiles on his face. He was obviously in a good mood. The county magistrate of Chong, and Li Yi, greets your majesty. Seeing these emperors and imperial concubines, there was one thing that was particularly bad. They often had to kneel down. The bluestone slabs in the pavilion were expensive and uncomfortable. Fortunately, Li Yi's knees only touched it slightly. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "No need to be so polite. Get up." Emperor Jing was a kind person. Although he was the ruler of a country, at least in Li Yi's view, he didn't give people too much pressure when facing him. Emperor Jing sat on a stone stool covered with a cushion. He pointed to the seat opposite him and said, "Sit. There must be something wrong with this abnormal situation. The ruler of a country should have some majesty." Being so polite, Li Yi was really not used to it. Could it be that as soon as he sat down, a group of imperial guards jumped out from the side, pulled out their swords and pointed at him to punish him for being disrespectful? Emperor Jing looked at him and said with a smile, "Why? Scholar Li, who dared to say fart in front of me, doesn't even dare to sit now?" Li Yi thought in his heart. If he had known that he was the emperor of the Jing kingdom, he would have run away as far as possible. He wouldn't have invited him to eat that piece of pastry in the spirit of sharing, and today's matter wouldn't have happened. It was all that piece of pastry's fault. "Thank you, your majesty." Since the old emperor said so, Li Yi had to sit down. The scene in front of him was very familiar. It seemed that when the two of them met, it was also in such an environment. Everything that happened today originated from the secret garden in Prince Ning's mansion, from that piece of sinful pastry. Seeing Li Yi sit down, Emperor Jing pointed to the table in front of Li Yi and said, "Try this white fungus and lotus seed porridge. See how the imperial chefs in the palace compare to Prince Ning's mansion." Li Yi's heart was beating like a drum. This was not right. Were all the emperors in the feudal society like this? Did he summon him to the palace this time just to treat him to a meal? As the saying goes, being in the king's company is like being with a tiger. Shouldn't the emperors kill the whole family and execute 9 generations if they don't like it? Who is this kind of enthusiastic and hospitable uncle next door? He looked down at the food on the table. The fragrance assailed his nostrils. If he hadn't been full just now, he would have had a big appetite. But the problem was that he had eaten so much just now he couldn't eat any more. Wei Zhong, who was standing outside the pavilion, lowered his head, but his attention was always on the pavilion. At this moment his face was pale and his legs and stomach were trembling. He racked his brain to recall if he had offended Li Xianxia in any way today. If he had, he would risk his life to save it. Yes, Li Xianxia didn't seem to like him smiling. In the future he couldn't smile in front of him even if he died. The emperor was a temperamental animal. Who knew if he would turn hostile in the next moment even if he was smiling now? Li Yi had to pick up the white fungus lotus seed porridge in front of him and took a sip. The porridge was delicious, really delicious. But he had just drunk most of the white fungus lotus seed soup from Her Royal Highness and eaten a plate of egg fried rice. No matter how delicious the porridge was, he couldn't drink it anymore. Not to mention, white fungus lotus seed porridge. "How is it?" Jing Emperor asked with a smile. "The heat is just right." Li Yi felt bitter in his heart, but he still had to keep a smile on his face. Jing Emperor seemed to be in a good mood. He picked up the chopsticks and ate. He drank 2 bowls of porridge in a row, which stunned Li Yi on the opposite side. The old man standing behind Jing Emperor showed a smile on his face. At this time the emperor didn't have any burden on his shoulders, just like that time in Prince Ning Mansion. The horseshoes, the divine punishment, and the words he unintentionally said were all deeply in the emperor's heart. The boy on the opposite side was really a guy who was good at creating miracles. The emperor once said, "Li Yi alone is worth thousands of troops and horses." This sentence seemed to be exaggerated, but everything he did was seen by Changde. He was like a lucky star who could always solve the emperor's problems in time. Especially in this battle of defending the border, it was the biggest achievement the emperor had made since he was on the throne. In the secret letter, General Su Dingyuan praised the divine punishment very much and almost attributed all the military achievements to the divine punishment. The emperor's prestige in the imperial court reached the peak of more than 10 years. The local magnates who had been restless also settled down. The envoys of the Qi kingdom were already on the way. This was the first time in decades that the Jing kingdom had taken the initiative in the struggle with the Qi kingdom. It would be recorded in history forever. Chapter 352. Accompany me to eat, accompany me to drink, accompany me to sleep. Of the 3 companions, Li Yi was only the first. As the ruler of a country, he could ask anyone to eat with him with just a word. Why did he choose him? Li Yi was already very full, but he still had to force himself to finish the white fungus and lotus seed porridge in front of him. He picked up some food with his chopsticks. Fortunately, the old emperor had not eaten his fill in the morning and seemed to have a good appetite. Most of the food on the table went into his stomach. After a while it seemed that he was finally full. Emperor Jing put down his chopsticks, and the eunuch standing to the side quickly handed him a yellow silk handkerchief. Emperor Jing used it to wipe his mouth and suddenly asked, "Do you have any dissatisfaction with me for letting you come to the capital from Qing'an Prefecture? I am indebted to your majesty to be made the magistrate of Chang'an County. It is a matter that brings honor to the family. I am not dissatisfied." Even if he was dissatisfied, he could not say it so bluntly. The old emperor's question was basically a useless question. Of course, this sentence could only be thought by Li Yi. "I know that you are lazy and unwilling to participate in the disputes of the court. I promise you that I will not involve you. Thus, I will only give you the title of nobility and not increase your rank." Emperor Jing stood up and said, "This is the land of the Jing kingdom. What is the difference between Qing and Jingdou? You are a rare pillar of talent. Everything you have done in the past 6 months has not solved my urgent needs. If you cannot be used by the country, it would be a great regret." Li Yi was a little ashamed. Compared to others, he lacked national pride and national honor. But this could not be blamed on him. His soul came from another world. He was not a citizen of the Jing kingdom. Even though he had integrated into the current society and accepted it, the deep-rooted things in his bones could not be easily changed. Moreover, the difference between a person's strength and the resistance he might face was too great. There is no suitable position for you in the imperial court, but if you are left idle at home, it will be a waste of talent. I believe that you do not want to be idle." When Emperor Jing walked out of the pavilion, Li Yi could only follow. After a pause he said, "The Directorate of Imperial Academy has a high opinion of the new algorithm. Since you are quite accomplished in mathematics, why don't you go to the palace and teach the princesses and princes about mathematics? They always complain that the lessons taught by teacher are obscure and difficult to understand. You should have a better way." Li Yi really wanted to say that he was very willing to do nothing. He could just be a parasite in the country. What was the point of teaching mathematics? His students were either princesses or princes. It would definitely not be easy to discipline them. Why did he have to make things difficult for himself? However, the old emperor was obviously announcing the truth and not asking for his opinion. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only keep his opinion to himself. The princess and the princes are still young and they are stubborn and mischievous. It's not easy to discipline them. Just treat them as students, and when the time comes, do as you please. Do as I please. These words could be interpreted in any way. Coming from the mouth of the emperor, it meant that Li Yi as a mathematics teacher had a lot of authority. If any prince disobeyed him, he could punish him by standing and slapping his palms. These were all, "Do as I please." Standing with the emperor was a very stressful thing, even though he was very approachable and did not put on airs like an emperor. Fortunately, the old emperor was very busy and did not have so much time to waste here with him. Maybe he only took out a part of his lunchtime. Being a teacher for the princes and princesses was something that Li Yi did not expect. However, he only needed to teach them 5 times a month, and each time was only for 2 hours. The working conditions were quite good. For Li Yi, who had rich work experience, it was not that difficult to accept. Of course, this time it was not for free and he was paid. "County Magistrate Li Yi, let me see you out of the palace." Wei Zhong expressionlessly led the way for Li Yi with a straight face. Li Yi did not understand why the man who had been smiling just now suddenly had such an expression. Finally, when they were about to walk out of the palace, he could not help but ask, "Eunuch Wei, you have been wearing a straight face all the way here. Do you have a problem with me?" Wei Zhong's body trembled when he heard this, and his face revealed a terrified expression. He said, "County magistrately, didn't you tell me not to smile in front of you?" The poor eunuch was about to cry in his heart. When had he ever met such a difficult person to please? He could not smile, but he could not smile either. In front of him he had to be more careful than in front of the emperor. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He just said it casually. He didn't expect this guy to take it seriously. He waved his hand and said, "Forget it. I was just saying. Don't take it seriously. Laugh if you want." Although he did not look good when he smiled, it was much better than wearing a straight face, as if he would stab people in the back at any time. When he entered the palace, he was carried in a sedan chair, but he had to walk back by himself. Wei Zhong had wanted to call a sedan chair for Li Yi at the gate of the palace, but Li Yi refused. Touching his swollen belly, Li Yi felt that it was better for him to walk back. This time he had gained something from entering the palace. He was suddenly conferred a title of nobility and granted land without saying anything else. He had always felt a little uneasy in his heart. Now the worries in his heart were gone. He just had to go to the palace every few days and resume his old business. At the same time, he could catch up with Her Highness, talk about business cooperation, and freeload on the food in the palace. His life was quite happy. And when he walked into the gate of the Li family to digest the food, and bumped into a man who was coming toward him, his life reached the peak of happiness. An extremely surprised expression appeared on Li Yi's face. He asked, "Fang, why are you here? Have Rui and Xiaohuan arrived?" Fang was also surprised. The next moment he gave Li Yi a big bear hug and patted him hard on the shoulder. When Li Yi was almost out of breath, he let go of him and said with a grin, "Yes, we just arrived in the capital. If it hadn't been for the rain, we would have arrived a few days ago. By the way, why are you here? Where are Rui and Xiaohuan now? It's such a long way. I was worried about Miss and Xiaohuan coming to the capital, so I followed them. If something really happened, it would be more convenient for a man to help." Fang said with a silly smile, "We just arrived not long ago. Madam is talking to Miss." If little aunt hadn't told him yesterday, Li Yi still wouldn't have known that the old madam had also brought them here. At this moment he couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. Led by a servant of the Li family, he quickly walked towards the old madam's residence. Son-in-law. Just after passing through a moon door, a thin figure trotted over from the front. Li Yi reached out and caught the little servant girl, who rushed over. Inside the room, a familiar figure came out. Chapter 353. He rubbed Xiaohuan's head out of habit. It had only been half a month, but the familiar action felt a little rusty. The most caring person was his maid. Just looking at her made him feel happy. Li Yi carried her up and spun her around. The maid was so shy that she couldn't even lift her head. He pinched her little face and asked, "Did you not eat well these days? How did you lose so much weight?" "Really?" The maidservant's eyes curved into crescent moons, and two shallow dimples appeared on her face. She had some baby fat and always hoped to become as thin as Miss and Second Mississippi. She wanted to have the sharp chin that the son-in-law liked. "Really?" He stretched out his finger and tapped on her forehead. He looked up at the woman who was walking towards them. The two looked at each other and smiled. There were thousands of words that they wanted to say. "Is back." The old mistress walked out with a smile and said, "Why are you standing outside? Come in quickly." As she spoke, her eyes did not move away from Rui. Obviously, the old mistress was very satisfied with this granddaughter-in-law. Li Yi saw a hairpin that he had never seen before on Rui's head. It was not new either. It was very likely that it was a gift from the old mistress. It was the old mistress's habit to give gifts whenever there was a disagreement. Anything valuable would be given. This was the old mistress's way of expressing her love. "Son-in-law, did you really become a viscount?" As the old mistress held Rui's hand and spoke, Fang sat next to Li Yi and asked mysteriously. Li Yi casually threw the waist token to him. Fang looked at it again and again but could not figure out anything. Although he was illiterate, he believed what the son-in-law said. Life was really unpredictable. Half a year ago he was a poor scholar that he personally kidnapped up the mountain. In a blink of an eye he had become a noble in the capital. When he thought back he felt a little sad. Don't go back to the capital this time. Has been conferred a noble title by His Majesty and will soon settle down here. The two of you should think about having children. The old mistress brought up the past again. She couldn't wait to have a great-grandson the next day. Rui blushed. After Madame Dowager finished speaking, she ordered a maid to open a small box on the table. She took out all the bracelets and hairpins and tried them one by one. In the courtyard, a few maids gathered together and whispered to each other. From time to time they would poke their heads out to look inside. I heard that young master's wife is here. What do you mean by heard? He's talking to the old madam inside right now. Young master is a man of striking appearance. I wonder what young master's wife looks like? That goes without saying. Just look at the second Mississippi. How bad can the two sisters be? I saw it just now. Young master's wife and young master are a good match. Unfortunately we won't have the chance. Since Madame Dowager's birthday banquet last night, young master, who had just returned to the Li family, became an influential figure in the Li family again. It was said that because of young master, Prince Ning's son and Princess Yongla both sent people to congratulate Madame Dowager. Master Sandalwood from the Cold Mountain Temple even came in person and presented gifts. Many people said that young master's handwriting was better than Zhao Chun's. They didn't know who Zhao Chun was, but they knew that young master was much better than they thought. Of course, the most shocking thing was that His Majesty conferred a viscount title on young master, which was the same as the old master. However, young master was still so young, Li Yi couldn't live in his viscount mansion today. Although he wanted to, according to the rules, he had to wait until someone from the palace came to inform him. In the afternoon he brought Rui to meet his grandma's family. They didn't know that he had become a viscount yet. After living in the capital for decades he suddenly had to leave. Of course he couldn't say that he didn't feel sad. The old man didn't seem to care whether he left or not. He just held Rui's hands tightly, choking with sobs and unable to say a word. Lies couldn't be kept for long. Every time he avoided a certain question the old man seemed to realize something. He became silent more and more often. At night they returned to the Li family. The four of them stayed in the small yard, which finally looked like a home again. The little maid obviously had a lot to say. After she opened her mouth she didn't stop talking. Most of the things that happened in Qing Prefecture in the half a month after Li Yi left. In the top courtesan competition of the Lantern Festival, Lu Xiaoqiao finally won first place. However, the most famous one was Zheng Zimo, the former top courtesan of the Jade Yard. A gifted scholar with the same name as the son-in-law wrote many poems for her. Many people offered sky-high prices just to see her. However, she had already redeemed herself and disappeared in Qing Prefecture. The goddess of Luo Shui became a legend. This matter was probably the entertainment headline of Qing Prefecture during this time. Even Xiao Huan had heard of it. Of course, what interested her most was the gifted scholar with the same name as the son-in-law. Li Yi was very surprised that Zheng Zimo had redeemed herself for him. However, thinking about it this way, all her actions had a reasonable explanation. That was, before the top courtesan competition she had already planned to redeem herself. She didn't want to increase her fame at all because the price of redeeming herself would be higher. Li Yi was a little embarrassed. He had good intentions but he almost ruined her big event. Li Yi felt that she must have scolded him a lot behind his back. However, she had actually left Qing Prefecture. The chance of seeing her again in the future was very slim. Thinking of this, an inexplicable sense of loss appeared in Li Yi's heart. The young servant girl continued, "Also, that old storyteller gave a lot of money to our family. Old Sun's dream of opening theaters all over the world had progressed to an unknown stage. Before he left, he had told him not to be too eager to expand. Steady progress was the best way. In the future it wouldn't be convenient for him to write scripts. On a whim he wanted to develop a similar entertainment industry in this world. However, this plan had been disrupted by this trip to the capital. He would leave all of this to old Sunday. The old man was in good spirits. Looked like he could still struggle for many years. As for what would develop in the end, he would have to wait and see. The business of Qing Prefecture had to be managed by someone he could trust. If the business in the capital started, no matter if it was the partnership with Ning Wangfu with Rui Nectar hard liquor or the brothel, they would all seem less important. It would be better to invest them all in other areas. Perhaps he would have to personally go back once for this matter. Most of the things that Xiao Huan said were actually related to him. As for the change of prefect in Qing and prefecture and the issuance of some new government decrees, these things didn't seem so important. There was one thing that was very important. Last time he had been delayed because he had rushed to the capital. This time no reason could be an obstacle. The journey was tiring for the young servant girl. As Xiao Huan spoke, she leaned on his arm and fell asleep. Li Yi carefully lifted her up and placed her on the bed in the room. He covered her with the blanket and closed the door to leave. He was prepared to complete the unfinished big event in his life. When he walked into the courtyard, he happened to see Rui being pulled back into her room by Mississippi Lu. She said that the sisters hadn't seen each other for half a month and had a lot to talk about. It was normal for sisters to have deep feelings. Li Yi gritted his teeth and glared fiercely at the courtyard next door. He made up his mind. The money he owed to Mississippi Lu, he wouldn't return it even if he was beaten to death. Chapter 354. Duke Qin Residence. Li Minghan has passed away. The grudge between the Qin and Li family ends here. In the future, do not act against the Li family or target Li Mingze, and do not use the Qin family's resources in court. The eldest son of the current Duke Qin and the true leader of the Qin family, Qin Qing, spoke to his gloomy-faced younger brother, Qin Chong. The county magistrate of Chong, and Li Minggen's son? Hearing the news, Qin Chong's gloomy face was still filled with disbelief. Then a trace of anger appeared. It's just a county magistrate. Why should our Qin family be afraid of him? If only things were so simple, Qin Qing said gravely. But this is the first instance of His Majesty conferring a noble title in recent years, leaping from a commoner to a noble in the capital. I heard that on the day of the Li family's matriarch's birthday banquet, Prince Ning and Princess Yongla both sent congratulatory gifts. Do you really think that there is no connection between these matters? The Qin family's decades of glory had relied on the emperor's grace. In reality, whether it was the marquis or the dukes, which noble family in the capital was not like this? Whether it was glory or poverty, it all depended on the decision of the imperial family. For the Qin family, a county magistrate or even a marquis was nothing, but they could not ignore the thoughts of the emperor. A county magistrate conferred a title was not just a small viscount. For His Majesty to ignore the objections of the court officials, how important must he be in His Majesty's heart? It was not worth the emperor's displeasure for a little personal grudge. I understand. Qin Chong clenched his fists and could only sigh helplessly. The grudge with the Li family was a personal grudge. If it negatively affected the entire Qin family because of a personal grudge, he would become a sinner of the family. Walking out of the room, Qin Chong let out a long sigh. A deep sense of helplessness surged from the bottom of his heart. When he saw the woman sitting in the garden, the helplessness on his face immediately disappeared and turned into a smile. He slowly walked over and said, "In a few days when the weather is good, let's go out for a walk. If you stay in the residence for too long, you will probably feel suffocated." The woman had a head of white hair and looked to be in her early 30s. She was originally staring ahead in a daze, but when she heard this, she returned to her senses. A faint smile appeared on her face as she said, "It's been more than 10 years. It's indeed a bit depressing. It's good to listen to second brother." Hearing this, a hint of joy appeared on Qin Chong's face. "I will arrange it immediately." The woman nodded with a smile, but the light in her eyes was still a little lacking. The sudden appearance of a noble was something that all the influential families in the capital had to pay attention to. It was especially so when they found out that they knew nothing about the county magistrate of Chang'an. It was as if he had appeared out of thin air and suddenly gained the favor of the emperor. Everyone was shocked and surprised. The officials in the court were naturally opposed to this. Almost all the nobles in the capital had obtained their titles during the founding of the country. From then on, it was harder than ascending to the heavens to be conferred a title. Many old officials had worked hard their whole lives and still could not obtain such a special honor. Prestige was only for one generation and could not be passed on to the children and grandchildren. How could a young man with no contributions be conferred a title? The emperor's action would chill the hearts of many officials in the court. However, everyone's opposition was suppressed by the emperor. A few of the big shots in the court also chose to remain silent. Even the censors did not submit a memorial, which made everyone feel that something was wrong. The emperor would not confer a title for no reason. The only possibility was that the county magistrate of Xianxia had made enough contributions to be conferred a title. At such a young age he had accomplished something that many old officials could not do in their entire lives. There was no way to verify this, and the emperor would not explain it in detail to them. It seemed that they could not get any useful information from the county magistrate of Xianxia. This was because the county magistrate was not like the other nobles. After being conferred a title, he did not invite other nobles, nor did he hold any banquets. He was so low-key that it made people's hair stand on end. The only thing they knew was that he was the eldest grandson of the Li family and the family of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Personnel. That was all. Li Xianxia, who was in the eye of the storm, had no time to care about this. He had just moved into his new home today. The county magistrate's mansion was actually not far from the capital city. Although one could not see the city wall from the doorstep, it could be considered as within the second ring road of the capital city. According to the eunuch who led the way, the mansion had just been built by the emperor's order by the Ministry of Works. Could not be more new. The conferment of a title was not just a title. The viscount's mansion, fief, tenants, maids, servants, and even guards were all included in the conferment package. Not long after they left the capital city, they entered the territory of Xianxia County. After walking along the official road for less than an hour, a magnificent mansion could be seen from afar. A group of maids and servants stood in 2 rows. When the crowd approached, they immediately bowed and said respectfully, "Welcome back, sir." Xiao Huan was startled. She grabbed Li Yi's sleeve and looked at these people curiously. Even when Li Yi was the county magistrate, she had never seen such a grand scene. Fang stood there in a daze and looked at the scene in front of him with envy. Hordes of maids, beautiful wives and concubines, and a large mansion. Wasn't this the life he dreamed of? The little girl Duanwu also held her mother's hand tightly and looked at the gate of the viscount's mansion with timid eyes. This was the place where they would live in the future. They would no longer have to squeeze on a small bed with their grandmother and mother. Would she have a room of her own? The woman named He Xiu, whose hand was held by the little girl, also had a look of realization on her face. A few days ago they were bullied on the street. The whole family was squeezed into a small room. In the blink of an eye, they lived in a big mansion with maids and servants. All of this made her feel like she was in a dream. Beside her, a man in his 40s was rubbing his hands nervously, but his face was full of excitement. There were no houses within 500 feet of the viscount's mansion. However, there were people looking around carefully from a distance. They had long heard that the manor had welcomed a new owner, who was a viscount personally conferred by His Majesty. All the villagers craned their necks to see what the viscount looked like. "Let's go in first." Li Yi waved his hand and led the way into the new house. The servants also swarmed in and stood neatly in the yard. Looking at the group of servants standing respectfully in the yard, Li Yi was still a little unaccustomed to it. From now on, everything, including their life and death, was in his hands. It turned out that this was the life of a noble. No wonder so many people wanted to be conferred the title of king or minister. The word power could indeed bring people different experiences. Chapter 355. Open your eyes wide and look carefully. In front of you are the masters of the Li family. This is the Marquis of Xianxia County, personally appointed by His Majesty. This is his wife, and this is the second Miss. Uncle Li stood in front of the servants and said loudly. Now there were dozens of people in the viscount's mansion. Naturally, it was different from before. All kinds of daily affairs needed to be taken care of. Of course, these things could not all be handed over to Li Yi or Rui. Of course, a housekeeper was indispensable. Madame Dowager specially asked Uncle Li to help her manage these affairs. That was to say, from now on, Uncle Li was the housekeeper of the viscount's mansion. There are only so many masters in the mansion. You must be respectful and not disrespectful. Except for the maids, no one is allowed to enter or leave the inner residence. It was the first time that the servants of the Li family met their masters and listened to the housekeeper's words. They stood respectfully in the same place and secretly remembered everyone's faces. They were perturbed. They did not know what the temperament of this lord was like and whether he was easy to get along with. What was the temper of Madame Dowager? She might have to serve him carefully these days. They were all registered as slaves and were the property of the Viscount's mansion. If they accidentally violated the taboo of their masters, no one would speak up for them even if they were drowned in a well. All right, all of you go and do your own things. There are not many people in the house. Just do what you should do on a daily basis. Li Yi waved his hand to the crowd of servants and said, Madame Dowager has poor eyesight. Pick 2 clever maids to serve Madame Dowager and let the others do their own things. In addition, for the first time you meet, each servant will be rewarded with a sum of money from the accountant. There was a lack of manpower, so Uncle Li was both the housekeeper and the accountant. Many of the servants were delighted to hear this. This amount was already a month's salary for them in the Viscount's mansion. More importantly, Lord Zhou was generous and seemed to be amiable, so he shouldn't be difficult to get along with. Their days in the future would probably be much easier. Even some of the pretty maids began to feel excited in their hearts. If their appearance could catch the Lord's eyes, they would really become a phoenix. Even if they could not become a concubine, their status would be great. However, when they saw the Lord's wife, second miss, and even their personal maids, they could not help but feel discouraged. With their appearance they really could not compare. Besides, second miss actually carried a sword with her. If the consequences were too serious, all the maids would give up this unrealistic idea. When they came from Qing'an Prefecture, they traveled light and had almost no luggage. However, the Viscount's mansion had all the necessary furniture. If they really needed something they could go out and buy it. When they came they saw that the Viscount's Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion. Li Yi and Rui naturally had to choose a courtyard in the inner mansion. Duanwu Xiao Yi and Lord's mansion stayed together. Mississippi Lu chose another. Xiao Huan did not dare to live alone, so she stayed with her. Fong and Uncle lived in the outer mansion. As the mistress, Rui was taken by 2 maids to familiarize herself with the Viscount's mansion. Xiao Huan also followed. Mississippi Lu was tidying up her own room. Li Yi sat on the stone bench in the courtyard. The maids and servants who passed by had to salute him respectfully. All of them were proof that this place would belong to him in the future. Imagine the sunlight was slightly intoxicating, the weather was beautiful, leisurely lying in the courtyard and basking in the sun. The 2 pretty maids on the left and right massaged his arms and legs. Then there was a talented maid who sang and danced. When he was tired of watching ordinary dances, he asked Miss Lu Air to perform a sword dance. With this life, what more could he ask for? Half a year ago he was still hiding in the mountains, drinking porridge and stealing chickens. Now he had crossed the threshold of being well off. He lived in the most prosperous city with a group of maids and servants. He officially lived the luxurious life of a feudal aristocrat. Young master, are we not going back to Qing'an Mansion in the future? Fong asked with a confused face. Li Yi felt that he had fallen. He was actually thinking about whether there was a big mansion with maids and servants in Qing'an Mansion. It seemed that it was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. He had not even started to enjoy, but he had already forgotten the hard life before. Anyway, it's not too far. If your wife agrees, you can come to the capital with her and Juzi. If old Sue and the others are willing to come, you can come with them. There will always be a place for you here. They had gone through the toughest days together and experienced life and death together. The group of people far away in Qing'an Mansion were actually the most trustworthy people. Okay, I'll go back tomorrow. Fong had obviously been waiting for Li Yi to say this. He slapped his thigh and said. After going through so many things, they were used to treating Li Yi as their backbone. The son-in-law and mistress were both in the capital, so there was no point in them staying in Qing'an Fu. Those people were restless in their bones. If they followed the son-in-law, there would be exciting things to do. In just a short half a day, all the servants in the Li mansion had figured out the situation in the mansion. At the same time, they let out a long sigh of relief. Lord Zhu and Madame's temperament was very good. They did not say a harsh word to them. Second Miss gave off a cold feeling and seemed difficult to get along with. However, when a maid accidentally tipped over a basin of water and wet her shoes, Second Miss did not say a word of reprimand. In addition, Madame's personal maid was very favored. She was just like the other master of the house. She must not be treated as a servant. Everyone secretly rejoiced at their luck. They did not have to worry about things like drowning ponds and filling wells in the future. Mississippi Lu returned to her room with a face full of anger. Li Yi had chased her out of the courtyard in the name of going to bed early. It's only been half a month. What's there to catch up on? Li Yi curled his lips. He closed the courtyard door and walked into his room. Rui stood by the bed and tidied up the bedding. She turned back and quickly turned back. Her gentle voice traveled over. When I came to the capital, I thought I would be going back soon. I didn't bring much with me. If we are going to stay in the capital in the future, I'm afraid we will have to go back as soon as possible to bring all the important things. At the very least, we have to bring the money at home. Li Yi walked over slowly and hugged her from behind. Rui's hands paused. Her pretty face immediately turned red. "Who, hubby?" Her breathing was slightly hurried and her voice was barely audible. "My wife's words from before, do they still stand?" Li Yi whispered in her ear. Of course she knew what Li Yi was referring to. She slowly turned around. She was half a head lower than Li Yi. Her face was even redder. She looked up into his eyes and nodded slightly. Li Yi lowered his head to look at this flawless face. This was his wife, the person he was destined to spend the rest of his life with. Taking a deep breath, he exerted a bit of strength and hugged her tightly, pressing his lips against her smooth, jade-like forehead. Then he kissed her eyes, nose and lips. In the room the candlelight flickered. A gust of wind blew in from an unknown source. The flame flickered a few times before it quietly extinguished. The beauty lowered her head shyly. The gifted scholar raised his eyebrows and smiled. A room full of love. Chapter 356. At noon, while Lord Zhu and Madame were eating, the servants of the Li family gathered together and whispered to each other. When Xiao Rong was pouring tea for Lord Zhu this morning, she accidentally knocked over the teacup. Guess what happened next? A servant girl said mysteriously. Xiao Rong is always so careless. She must have been scolded badly. She might even have been fined. Another servant girl pouted. If that was the case, I wouldn't have mentioned it in front of you. The servant girl who spoke first shook her head. Another servant girl was shocked and said in disbelief, "Did Lord Zhu kick Xiao Rong out of the residence?" "What do you mean by, kick out?" Not only was Lord Zhu not angry, he even rewarded her with money and said something about peace and quiet. The servant girl's face was full of envy. She wished that she was the one who broke the teacup. Ah! Hearing this, everyone was stunned. How could there be a servant who didn't get punished for doing something wrong and instead get rewarded? If it was any other family, breaking a teacup in front of the master would be a light reprimand. A heavy punishment would be beating and scolding. Even 2 slaps would be considered a light punishment. There's more. A look of envy appeared on the maidservant's face as she continued. Xiao Qing's table was polished a little brighter and the floor was swept a little cleaner. Lord Zhu was so happy that he increased her salary by 50%. Hiss. Everyone took a deep breath. Their faces were full of envy. On the first day, their monthly salary was increased by 50%. Why didn't such a good thing happen to them? At this point, the servants of the Li family understood that their Lord Zhu had a habit of rewarding people whenever he was happy. It seemed that they had to perform well in the future. Their future was suddenly full of expectations. I understand now. No wonder Li San came out with a bunch of broken vase pieces. He already knew about it. A servant in green suddenly realized. Li San also got his monthly salary raised? Another servant said with some dissatisfaction. What the hell was this? They worked so hard but they didn't get rewarded. Others who broke teacups and vases were either rewarded or increased salary. This was too unfair. A few servants were already thinking about what other worthless things there were in the residence. Should they find a chance to break them too? Otherwise, wouldn't they be at a disadvantage? Promotion fee? The well-informed servant girl shook her head and said, I heard that Li San was viciously kicked twice by Lord Zhu. He is not allowed to eat until he fills the 2 large vats of water in the residence before nightfall. The servants looked at each other speechlessly. It seemed like this method was not going to work. Right, Xiao Rong and Xiao Qing were both maidservants. Could it be that only the maidservants in the residence had this special exception? All the male servants immediately felt somewhat indignant in their hearts. This kind of matter they couldn't decide for themselves. Why are you all gathered there? Have you all finished your work? A voice sounded out from behind. Everyone's faces changed as they dispersed. In the entire estate compared to Lord Zhu, they were even more afraid of Butler Li. Fong and a middle-aged man were squatting at the door, each holding a huge bowl in their hands, eating and chatting happily. Li Yi called them twice, but they weren't willing to sit at the table, so he let them be. Old Furen couldn't see and needed someone to serve her when she ate. For this matter, little aunt wasn't willing to let the maidservants do it for her. She only sent someone to deliver the food to Old Furen's room, and she fed Old Furen mouthful by mouthful. At the dining table, Li Yi placed all the dishes that Duanwu couldn't reach onto her plate. The little girl was too skinny. She was still growing and should eat more. Thank you, big brother. Perhaps it was because of her character from a young age. She didn't speak much and always had a timid look. Even though things were different now, it was a habit that was formed over a long period of time that wasn't easy to change. On one side sat Duanwu and on the other side sat Xiao Huan. The most considerate servant girl was always the little servant girl. She knew what he liked to eat and what he didn't like to eat. In the time it took for Duanwu to take food, her own bowl also piled up into a small mountain. All right, that's enough. He stopped the little servant girl from taking more food into her bowl. Although the cooking skills of the Fu's maids were not bad, he still had to eat slowly. Mississippi Lu was still holding a grudge against him for forcefully chasing her away last night. There were a few times when Li Yi wanted to eat something, but she always snatched it away before he could. He was in a good mood today and didn't intend to argue with her. She raised her head and met Rui's eyes. A red cloud immediately appeared on her face and she quickly lowered her head. Although they had been married for half a year, it had only been a day since they became real husband and wife. It was understandable that she was a little thin-skinned. Thinking about it, it was better to be alone. In a few days he would go back to Qingyan Prefecture and arrange everything there. Only he and Rui would go back without Mississippi Lu. It would be a honeymoon trip. It would be fun to walk and see along the way. The scripture for the old monk was almost finished. After a few days he would send someone to Cold Mountain Temple. This matter would be settled. He still had to find a chance to discuss the business with Her Highness. It was definitely not enough to rely on the salary of the court to support the family. This matter concerned dozens of people in the Viscount's mansion, so he couldn't be careless. From a family of 4 to the master of such a big Viscount's mansion, it was not easy to adapt to the psychological gap. In addition, he had no experience and laziness. If Uncle Li, the housekeeper, didn't take care of everything, Li really didn't know how to run it. Not long after the meal, old mistress of the Li family came to the mansion in person. On the one hand, she wanted to see how her grandson's Viscount's mansion was doing. On the other hand, she had a lot to say to her granddaughter-in-law. The two of them talked in the room and Li Yi was not allowed to go in. Later, old mistress saw that there were not many maids in the mansion, so she insisted on sending some from the Li family, but Li Yi persuaded her. There were not many people in the family. Why did they need so many maids to serve them? They didn't need to be used and took up space. What's more, these people needed to be paid. The mansion was still in the stage of development, so they should save as much as possible. In the end, old mistress walked into the courtyard where his grandmother's family lived. When Li Yi walked into the room, he saw her holding his grandmother's hand apologetically and saying, "I'm sorry for making you suffer all these years. If it weren't for the Li family, the He family wouldn't have lived so hard these years. But if it weren't for the He family, the Li family wouldn't have turned against the good in-laws and declined so much." It was no longer clear who was right and who was wrong about the things that happened in the past. However, even if the Li family declined for the He family, who were just commoners, it was still an existence that they couldn't afford to reach. At first, old mistress was a little reserved, but later she gradually relaxed. When Li Yi walked out of the door, they talked about something happy and their laughter could be heard far away. Chapter 357. Although the Li family had indeed been greatly affected by what had happened back then, wasn't the He family also a victim? Of the two old people, one had lost a son and the other had lost a daughter. In this matter they probably had very similar feelings. Li Yi didn't disturb them. He walked all the way back to his room, stepped into the door and saw Rui writing something at the table. In fact, in the family only Xiaohuan didn't know much. Although Sister Rui didn't go to school, she was literate. Li Yi walked closer and quietly watched her write. Perhaps because of practicing martial arts, she had excellent control. This beautiful hairpin-style small regular script was not written by ordinary people at all. There is a beauty in the north, peerless and independent. Seeing the beautiful handwriting on the paper, Li Yi was slightly stunned. This poem was copied by him for Zheng Zimo. Although in the end it helped her more than she helped, the poem must have been spread out. It was not surprising that Rui knew about it. However, Rui had never been interested in these things. Why was she so abnormal today in copying poems? Seeing Li Yi coming over, she put down the pen and said with a smile can make a city fall, and another smile can make a country fall. Being described like this by my husband, Lady Zuemo, the goddess of Luoshui, must be extremely beautiful when she smiles. The expression on Li Yi's face was a little awkward. After all, if his wife knew that he had praised other women like this outside, he would always be a little lacking in confidence. Especially when he had accidentally seen that woman's naked body. However, Zheng Zimo was a stubborn girl. Although she was a little stubborn, there was nothing to say about her beauty. Her figure was simply heaven-defying. Compared to Rui, each had their own merits. If only, Li Yi soon found that his thoughts were anchored. He laughed dryly and said, "In fact, it's not that good. Poems are always exaggerated. A smile can make a city fall. How can there be such a thing? This is not beauty, it's sorcery." Rui was silent for a long time. She seemed to have made up her mind and said, "If you are really interested in Lady Zimo, how about—" Li Yi quickly waved his hand and said, "Don't get me wrong. Lady Zuemo and I are just friends. At that time I just wanted to help her win the championship. I had no other intentions." For Rui to be able to say this sentence, it really made Li Yi extremely surprised. Based on what she said, the next thing she wanted to say was to welcome her into the house. This happiness had come too suddenly. Although almost all men yearned for a life with a group of wives and concubines, especially when their wives and concubines were so beautiful, as a good young man in the 21st century, he had received modern ideological education and was deeply influenced by monogamy. Of course, Li Yi had also yearned for it. However, there was a big difference between thinking about it and actually doing it. On the one hand, there was such a beautiful and gentle wife at home, so it was unlikely that he would have other thoughts. On the other hand, feelings could not be forced. Although Zheng Zimo was beautiful, had a good figure, could sing, dance and draw well, it would be a problem if a man did not have any thoughts when facing her. If he could welcome her home, just thinking about it was a bit bah. On the one hand, there was no emotional foundation. On the other hand, she did not have any feelings for him. This matter was not feasible at all. Rui looked up at him and whispered, "Don't worry, husband. I am not a jealous woman. If you did not have feelings for Lady Zhu, how could you write such a poem? Don't, it's just a few poems. If you are willing, I can write 10 or even 100 for you now. Lady Zuemo and I are really not what you think." Li Yi hurriedly explained. Rui's temperament was still more traditional. She considered everything from her own standpoint, which made Li Yi feel angry and amused at the same time. How could there be a legal wife who would take care of finding a concubine for her husband? If the person who said this was Mississippi Liu, then he would definitely refuse her sternly at the first moment and give her a severe ideological education, indicating that he was devoted to Rui and had never thought of taking a concubine. Because he knew that as long as he showed a certain desire in front of Mississippi Liu, what was waiting for him was definitely not a happy life with a beautiful wife and concubine, but a sword that would cut him in the head. But since Rui could say so, she must have thought so. He didn't know how long she had been struggling when she made this decision. "Husband, you really didn't." When Rui raised her head and spoke uncertainly, Li Yi had already held her in his arms, patted her shoulder and said, "Don't think too much. I really didn't mean it. Don't say that I didn't mean it. Lady Zuemo didn't mean it either. Don't say these words again." The relationship between men and women in this world was still conservative. If they were not husband and wife, they probably wouldn't have too much contact on normal days. However, for Li Yi, who had a modern mind, it was really normal to have a few friends of the opposite sex. Even Fong had a mysterious little Hong. If their temperaments were compatible and their temperaments were congenial, a friendship that started with feelings and ended with etiquette was still worth advocating. With Wan Ruoqing, with Zheng Zuemo, with Eming Zhu, These were all the purest relationships between men and women, except for the occasional dreams he would dream of them. But this kind of thing was out of Li Yi's control, and he had never had any improper thoughts in reality. If he really got all of them together, even if he didn't worry about the harmony of the harem, he would have to worry about his kidneys. I understand, Rui said softly with a slightly red face. A light cough came from the door. Mississippi Lu knocked on the door and said, "Have you guys hugged enough? Someone is looking for you outside. It seems to be from the palace." After saying that, she looked into the room with a strange look, turned around and left. Rui hurriedly left Li Yi's arms and her face became even redder. Li Yi's expression was slightly annoyed. He was always disturbed at the critical moment. Rui was getting more and more unruly. Thinking about what the people from the palace were doing, he inadvertently glanced down and found that there was not only the beauty song on the table, but almost all the poems he had given to Zheng Zuiamo. Thinking about it for a while, although most of these poems were exaggerated, he had to admit that the stubborn girl was impeccable except for her stubborn temper. Whoever married her would really enjoy a good life. He turned to look at Rui and asked tentatively, "My wife just said that if I am interested in Miss Zhou, what will happen?" Rui was stunned, and suddenly the corners of her mouth curved up. She smiled and said, "What did I say just now?" After a moment of daze, Li Yi also smiled, shook his head and walked out of the room. Looking at his back as he left, the smile on Rui's mouth spread. She put the poems on the table carefully in the drawer, and a rare slyness flashed in her eyes. Chapter 358. Thinking about what happened just now, even Rui knew how to play tricks, which made Li Yi, who thought he knew her very well, feel tired. Fortunately, he held his bottom line just now and was not fooled by the bait she threw out. If he had been careless and exposed his thoughts as a man, what would have happened? He didn't know. Even he couldn't figure out Rui now. The person who came from the palace was still a eunuch, but he was not someone Li Yi knew. He stood straight in the front hall with a straight face. When he saw Li Yi coming in, he stepped forward and said in an emotionless voice, "His Majesty has ordered me to teach mathematics to the princes and princesses. Today the Doctor of Mathematics of the Imperial College is on leave due to illness. In order not to delay the studies of the princes and princesses, please come with me to the palace now." No. Li Yi frowned. He was in such a hurry that he didn't even give people time to prepare for the lessons. What was he going to teach in the palace without any preparation? The eunuch urged with a straight face, "The studies of the princes can't be delayed. You better hurry up, Li." I know. Wait a minute, I'll come out soon." Li Yi waved his hand, turned back and said a few words to Rui. Soon he came out, looked at the eunuch and said lightly, "Let's go." A carriage was already parked outside the palace. Given the distance from here to the palace, it would only take them an hour to get there. The group of little princesses and princes were about 7 to 10 years old. In the future, under normal circumstances, their mathematics level would be at the level of a second or third grader in elementary school. However, considering that they had never taken mathematics classes before and did not know what the previous classes were like, Li Yi decided to start from the basics. Of course, teaching materials were not a problem. There were all kinds of teaching materials from kindergarten to university. The teaching materials in the future were professionally certified and couldn't be more scientific. Any one of them would do. He showed his waist token at the gate of the palace and walked in with the eunuch. Last time when he came out of the palace, Li Yi remembered some directions. The princes and princesses went to school in Bowen Hall. They would pass by the food bureau on the way, so the distance between them was not far. When he walked to the door of Bowen Hall, the eunuch said and stood outside the hall to wait. "County Magistrate Li, there is still a quarter of an hour before the princesses and princes start to study. You can go in first." Bowen Hall was a small palace. When Li Yi walked into the hall, he saw that there were low tables and low tables in the hall. Perhaps it was not time yet, so there was no one in the hall. There was only a fatty sleeping on the table in front of him. From the back, the little fatty should be about the same age as Li Yingkai. But his body was slightly smaller than Li Yingkai. Li Yingkai was sleeping. Perhaps Li Yi's footsteps woke him up. The little fatty suddenly jumped up from his seat and said loudly, "Disciple rules, sage teachings, first filial piety, second honesty. I didn't sleep. After saying this, he found that there was no one around. Then he remembered that it was not the old man's class today. He just wanted to sleep on the table for a while before the boring math class began. Since he was not sleeping in the class of the old man, and the old man would not complain to his father, then there was nothing to be afraid of. The little fatty turned his head angrily and glared at the guy who disturbed his sleep. It's you. Seeing that there was another person in the hall, the anger on the little fatty's face immediately disappeared. He asked, "Hey, are you here to make delicious food for us?" The last time Xianxia invited them to eat that strange thing, he still couldn't forget it. The imperial chefs in the palace tried several times but couldn't make that kind of taste. He had been thinking about it for 2 days. No. Li Yi shook his head and said. He asked this kind of question as soon as they met. No wonder this prince could be so strong at such a young age. The little fatty slapped the table and pretended to be dignified. He said, "I am Prince Jin Li Han. I order you to go to the food bureau and make the same food as last time." Li Yi looked around and was indifferent to the words of the young prince. Last time it was because of the old emperor's decree and the arrogant Lolita's face. But now it was different. He was not the imperial chef and had no obligation to cook for them. If you dare to not listen to me, believe it or not, I will ask my father to beat you." Seeing that Li Yi was indifferent, the little fatty raised his eyebrows and threatened. Li Yi had a lot of experience dealing with naughty children. The bear prince was just a kind of naughty child, nothing to be afraid of. As a prince, Li Han had always gotten whatever he wanted in the palace. Other than being afraid of his father, afraid of eldest royal sister, afraid of Shou Ning, afraid of Li Li who would bite people, afraid of that old man, afraid of another old man, afraid of... who else had he been afraid of? In short, a chef from the food bureau dared to disobey his orders. This made Prince Jin very angry. "You dare to be disrespectful to me. Just you wait, I will tell my father today." Li Han looked at Li Yi and said angrily. If he didn't beat him, he wouldn't be able to vent his anger. But he couldn't beat him too hard. Otherwise, who would cook for him? Not long after Li Han's words fell, 7 to 8 figures came in from the door. There were men and women, and the one in the lead was Princess Xianxia. Why are you here?" When she saw Li Yi, Princess Xianxia was pleasantly surprised. Among the princes and princesses, a few had seen Li Yi before, but they only thought he was a chef from the food bureau. Those who didn't eat hot pot with Xianxia last time were seeing him for the first time. The eunuch walked over and said with a flattering smile, "Your Highness, Count Li will be your mathematics teacher from now on." Li Yi gave him a meaningful look. This guy was livid in front of him, but he was smiling so brightly in front of the princess. This was blatant discrimination. "Teacher." Prince Jin was stunned for a moment, then his face became dull. Since when could a chef from the Xianxia bureau be their teacher? Princess Xianxia didn't care about whether he was a teacher or not. She said with surprise, "Teach me how to make hot pot later. I didn't learn it last time." "Let's talk about it later." Li Yi nodded. He looked at the group of princesses and princes and said, "Since all the princes and princesses are here, let's start." Perhaps it was because of the special status of the princesses and princes that they were even more obedient to the rules. Without the temptation of a story, they all returned to their seats and sat properly. Even Li Han, who had wanted to hit him with the paddle just now, did not do anything out of line. First, Xianxia introduced the princesses and princes. After Li Yi noted them down, he asked about the progress of her mathematics class. The answer he got was that they were still at the stage of learning Arabic numerals. The mathematics teacher from before was teaching them how to convert Chinese numerals into Arabic numerals. In other words, their mathematics was still at the most primitive stage. There was no blackboard or chalk in this world. Most of the courses they had to learn were taught. However, it was impossible to understand mathematics with just one's mouth. Fortunately, the mathematics teacher from before understood this. He stuck the white paper on the upright wooden board and wrote with a brush. It was similar to the blackboard of the future. "Before we start teaching, let's do a test." Li Yi turned around and wrote on the white paper with a brush. 36, 451, 68,832, 89,563, 75,467. When the princes and princesses were still wondering what the test was, Li Yi said again, "Write these numbers on the paper with Arabic numerals." Li Yi looked at Li Han, who was looking around, and a smile appeared on his face. He said, "Your Highness, come up and write." Chapter 359. Soon the princes and princesses understood what the test was. Usually when the teacher was in class he would give them some tests such as reciting articles, explaining the meaning of a certain sentence and so on. If they could answer correctly the teacher would praise them. If they couldn't answer correctly there would be no punishment. The teacher would only repeat those things again or tell them to study hard. Only the mathematics teacher didn't care about their identity as princes and princesses. He would often hit their hands. His father actually acquiesced to this. Fortunately, the person teaching them mathematics would be changed in the future. The teacher in front of them seemed to be easy to bully. Obviously Prince Jean thought so. Why should it be me? I'm not going. Li Han's round face was filled with anger. Although he was young he was not stupid. He just said that he would tell his father to hit the other party. Now he was asking him to go up and lose face. This was obviously revenge. Only a fool would really go up. The teacher's ABA number was not fun at all. It was crooked and ugly. It was not written from top to bottom. He didn't even remember those numbers until now. Those millions, how would he know what those crooked numbers were? He would definitely lose face if he went up. For Prince Jean, who cared about his face, this was unbearable. Li didn't care at all. He looked at him and said, "It's fine if your Highness Prince Jean doesn't want to come up. This time your test result is 0. I will write your Highness's result on a red paper and post it outside the Bowen Hall. In the future it will be the same rule. Every once in a while I will give you a test. All the unqualified scores will be posted outside so that everyone can see it." When Li Han heard this his face suddenly turned pale. Although he wasn't clear about the meaning of 0 he knew that it was the worst grade. Prince Jean Li Han is the worst among all the princes and princesses. If such a thing was posted outside he was afraid that it would quickly spread throughout the palace. At that time how would his father look at him? How would his mother look at him? How would his brothers and sisters, eunuchs and palace maids look at him? Just imagining it made Li Han's face turn even paler. He no longer dared to ask why and hurriedly stood up. Although he was a prince he did not dare to be disrespectful to the teacher. If his father found out he would definitely be punished. Li Han picked up the brush and bit his thumb as he struggled with the numbers. Li Yi walked down and wandered around the tables. For the princes and princesses who were used to writing Chinese characters, Arabic numerals were still a relatively novel thing. They had some mathematical foundations but they were all based on another system. First impressions were the strongest so it was impossible for their thinking to change so quickly. Even the simplest numbers were messed up by them. The order of the numbers was reversed and they remembered the wrong numbers. There were all kinds of problems. The one with the highest accuracy rate was actually Xianing. Only one number was missing a digit. Looking back at Li Han's name, it was a tragic sight to behold. Luckily he had written the simplest number correctly so it wasn't a complete wipeout. "Okay, you can leave." Li Yi waved his hand at him. Li Han immediately put down the brush and ran back to his seat. He stared at Li Yi with wide eyes, afraid that the word 0 would come out of his mouth. "Not bad, you got one right." Li Yi picked up the brush and put a tick on a certain number. Although he did not know what it meant, it was not 0 so he did not have to be posted outside the Bowen Hall. Li Han let out a long sigh of relief. The most basic things were taught like this. Thinking about it, the previous mathematics teacher did not fully understand it. Li Yi could only treat them as preschoolers. If he wanted to teach them mathematics he first had to let them remember how to write numbers. There was no shortcut. Li Yi wrote down the numbers 0 to 9 and let them keep repeating it. After estimating the time, Li Yi gently patted the table and said, "Okay, take a break for 15 minutes. You can go play outside and come back after 15 minutes. Every time he taught it was 2 hours. How long could a 7 or 8-year-old child concentrate? Not to mention that they could not accept 2 hours of non-stop teaching. Even Li Yi himself could not accept it. Seeing that a few princes were obviously a little absent-minded, Li Yi simply let them take a break during the lesson. The princes and princesses had never taken a break during the lesson before. Their buttocks would hurt after sitting for 2 hours. Today it was not even half the time and they could actually go out to play. As soon as Li Yi's voice fell, they put down their brushes and rushed out like a swarm of bees. After a while the eunuch ran in anxiously and said, Li Xianxia, His Majesty asked you to teach the princes and princesses. Why are you teaching or am I teaching? Li Yi glared at him and said, Is there any tea? Bring a pot over, I'm thirsty. After a while the eunuch went to prepare tea. He felt that Li Xianxi's temper was even worse than the other great scholars who taught the princes and princesses. After teaching for more than half an hour without a break, Li Yi was already thirsty. After standing for a long time his legs were a little tired, so he walked out of the hall and sat on the steps to rest. In front of the Bowen Hall was a large square. At this time the sun was shining brightly. The princes and princesses were chasing and playing in the square. Li Yi was a little confused. He did not see Princess Yongning, the silly little girl, today. Was she not here for class? Your Highness, why is Princess Yongning not here? Doesn't she need to attend class? Hearing Li Yi's voice, Li Han, who had just walked out of the hall, shivered. He pointed to a corner not far away and said, Yongning is there. She never attends class. After saying that, he disappeared like a wisp of smoke. Li Yi looked in the direction of his finger and saw a small figure sitting there. It seemed that she did not fit in with the whole world. A little princess and a little prince stood beside her and reached out to pull the doll in her arms. She just hugged it tightly and did not say a word. When Li Yi walked over, the little princess and the prince ran away. Princess Yongning looked up and was startled. She took out a transparent bead from her arms, put it in her palm and handed it to Li Yi. For me. Li Yi took the bead and asked with some surprise. The little girl nodded, stood up with the doll in her arms and walked away. Li Yi looked at the bead in his hand. It looked like glass but not quite like it. Was this the reward she gave him for the bowl of egg-fried rice? However, the little princess was obviously unwilling to communicate with people. Li Yi looked at her slowly, leaving back, shook his head, put away the bead, turned around and walked back. The break between classes was really useful. The princes and princesses who sat back in their seats were obviously more focused than before. Now let's start class. Li Yi glanced at the crowd, pointed to two people and said, Your Highness, Prince of Zhou, Princess of Anyang, please come up here and write the 10 numbers I just taught you on it. I knew it. Seeing his two younger brothers and sisters reluctantly walking up, Prince Jin Li Han screamed wildly in his heart. He saw the scene of Anyang and Li Zhi bullying Yongning just now. If you don't want to be the laughing stock of the whole palace, remember not to provoke Yongning and Master in the future. Chapter 360. Perhaps because of the strict etiquette of the royal family, it was a very easy thing to teach the princes and princesses. The accident that Li Yi expected did not happen. Except for a small episode with Prince Jin at the beginning, the first class was quite smooth. Today's main objective was to let them understand numbers and learn how to write. There were only 2 hours of time and the break took up less than an hour, so they couldn't teach much. Moreover, they had to consider whether they could accept being taught too much. Every substitute teacher had to cultivate their own spies or claws and teeth. In layman's terms, they were lackeys. Princess Xianxia, who was the most intelligent and had the most solid foundation, naturally became the representative of the mathematics subject. In addition to maintaining classroom discipline, she also had the responsibility of supervising and checking the completion of extracurricular homework by her younger brothers and sisters. After promising Xianxia to teach her how to make hot pot, after the lecture, Li Yi personally demonstrated it to her in the Shang Food Bureau. The old emperor's asthma couldn't eat spicy food, so he didn't even put dogwood in it. There were also a lot of things to pay attention to in the sauce. This time Xianxia played the good tradition of a good memory and a bad pen. She recorded the steps one by one. She had never been so active in class. Although the little loli was occasionally arrogant, she was sensible and filial. When Li Yi taught her, he didn't hold back. He didn't even hide some ultimate secret skills. Before leaving, he took 2 cucumbers from the Shang Food Bureau. At the end of the first lunar month, it was cold in spring. This thing could only be eaten in the palace. The 4 guards of the Li family were guarding at the gate of the palace. The carriage of the Viscount's mansion was parked there. Li got on the carriage. The coachman flicked his whip and the carriage slowly moved forward. This carriage was given by the old emperor. The feudal society was strict and the etiquette was even stricter. There were laws and regulations on who took what carriage and what to rely on. When you go out and see the other's carriage, you know whether you can afford to provoke the person inside or not. Of course, Li Yi was now one of the group of people who couldn't afford to provoke. The carriage was the best, but it turned out that 2 wheels were sometimes not as good as 2 legs. Unexpectedly, there was a traffic jam in the city. There was already a long queue of carriages in front of him. Li Yi could only get off the carriage and order them to take a detour and wait for him at the city gate. After walking on both sides of the road for about 10 meters, they finally saw the source of the crowd. In front of a medicine shop, a group of people blocked the road so that not even a drop of water could trickle through. The people of Qi are all up to no good. How dare they sell fake medicine to us? Smash their shops. A voice shouted. Someone immediately chimed in. That's right. Harming the people of our Jing kingdom in the capital city, this shop should have been destroyed long ago. The door of the medicine shop was tightly shut. Due to the excitement of the crowd, everyone threw everything they could at the door. Stones, rotten leaves, rotten eggs. The entrance of the medicine shop immediately became a mess. Li Yi had no intention of watching the commotion. He took a detour and walked towards the city gate in front of him. The Jing kingdom had been bullied by the Qi kingdom for decades. Although the people of the Jing kingdom were not on bad terms with each other, there was never a lack of angry youths. There were always people with strong national pride who felt that the people of the Qi kingdom were all bad people and should be destroyed by humanitarianism. Originally, if Jinghua had always been bullied, this kind of conflict would not have escalated. After all, the fist was the hard truth. If there really was a conflict based on the principle of maintaining international harmony and protecting international friends, the government would, to a certain extent, side the people of Qi to avoid becoming enemies with Qi again. However, things were different now. Just a few days ago, the state of Jing, which had always been suppressed by the Qi, suddenly turned the tables and fought a beautiful battle. The state of Jing, which had always been the initiator of peace negotiations, had gained the upper hand this time and even occupied 2 of the other cities. The international situation had reversed in an instant. The long-accumulated resentment of the citizens of the state of Jing had finally been vented, and the people of Qi living in the state of Jing had suffered. At this time there was no such thing as rational patriotism. It was not important whether the medicine sold in the medicine shop was fake or not. What was important was that this shop belonged to the people of the Qi kingdom. The envoy from the Qi kingdom was about to arrive. At this time they had to show their country's might and let them know that the people of the Jing kingdom were not so easily bullied. Li Yi did not intend to watch the commotion. He had not eaten yet. As a teacher to the princes and princesses, not only was the salary low, but they did not even provide him with meals. His mouth was dry and his stomach was hungry. The royal family lacked the basic human care. How many officials like him would be bitterly disappointed? Benefactor, please wait a moment. A voice came from behind. Li Yi looked back and saw 2 monks walking towards him. Benefactor, may I ask how to get to the Fahua temple? An old monk asked with a smile. The other middle-aged monk was dressed plainly and held a metal rod in his hand. His face was narrow and thin and he stood expressionlessly behind the old monk. He gave off a lot of pressure. I don't know. Li Yi took another look at the middle-aged monk, then shook his head. He pointed to the crowd in front and said to the old monk, "Why don't you go there and ask, Reverend?" He did not know where the Fahua temple was, but he knew how to get to the Cold Mountain temple. Alright, he could finish copying the sutra today. It was time to send it to the old monk Tanin. Amit Ba. Thank you, benefactor. The old monk smiled and turned to walk in the direction of the crowd. During the meal, he learned that the whole family would be going to the Cold Mountain temple under the guidance of the old lady. The temple fair at the Cold Mountain temple had just ended a few days ago, and an even more lively and grand Dharma assembly had begun. The Cold Mountain temple was funded by the imperial court to set up a vegetarian diet, promote Buddhism and praise the virtues of Buddha. It was said that these days, all the famous monks in the Jing kingdom would gather at the Cold Mountain temple. Even the shameless ones would try their best to get close to the Cold Mountain temple. Such a grand Dharma assembly was only held once a year. It was said that not only the dignitaries of the Jing kingdom, but even the royal family would also participate. If he showed his face in front of the royal family and made his presence known, he might be given the title of a monk of great virtue. Later he heard from Xiao Huan that the old lady actually wanted to bring the young mistress to worship the child-giving Guanyin. She wanted to worship all the gods and Buddhas as long as she could give her a great-grandson. Li Yi felt that it was a little far-fetched to pray to Buddha for a great-grandson. It was only useful to pray to him for this kind of thing. Since they were going to the Cold Mountain Temple tomorrow, they could just help him take the scripture. He didn't know what kind of superstition the old lady had that all the people she brought were women, and she didn't allow him to go with them. But anyway, he was too lazy to go. What was so interesting about a group of monks chanting scriptures? If it was a young and beautiful nun, it might be a little interesting. But if that was the case, the old lady might not let him go. When you go tomorrow, help me give this scripture to an old monk called Tan Yin. When copying the scripture, Li Yi specially chose the short ones to copy. In fact, it would have taken him a few days to finish, but because he cut corners, he finished the task not long after dinner. If he really took out all the Buddhist scriptures in the library, he would not be able to do anything else for the rest of his life. This scripture was all the scriptures of the scriptures. It was definitely enough to deal with the old monk. Xiao Huan took the scripture and opened it. She only felt dizzy from reading so many words. She hurriedly closed the book and nodded. She said, "Don't worry, young master. I will definitely give it to the old monk personally. Remember to call him Great Master tomorrow." When Li Yi walked out of the study, he added. Chapter 361. Lord Zhu, Lord Zhu. Li Yi struggled to open his eyes and saw the maidservant named Xiao Qing standing at the head of the bed, gently pushing his shoulders. There was no one beside him for a long time. Rui was going to the temple with old madam to offer incense, so Li Yi didn't know when she woke up. "What time is it now?" Li Yi sat up from the bed, rubbing his eyes as he asked. "Lord Zhu, it's almost past midnight," the pretty maidservant said with a red face, not daring to look at the half-naked Li Yi. Midnight? Li Yi was stunned when he heard that. He didn't expect to wake up at 10 o'clock. It seemed like he shouldn't stay up too late at night in the future. Xiao Qing didn't forget why she came to wake Lord Zhu up, so she said, "Lord Zhu, hurry up and get up. His Highness is waiting for you outside." "Li Xian, what is he doing here?" Li Yi quickly put on his clothes and washed his face with Xiao Qing's help. He walked out and saw Li Xian standing in the courtyard. "You actually slept until now?" Li Xian's face was full of disbelief. He didn't know that Li Yi was in such a state at home. Li Yi glanced at him and continued to rinse his mouth with the green salt. It wasn't even 11 o'clock and it wasn't time to eat yet. Was this considered late? "Stop dawdling. Hurry up and come with me." Li Xian walked over and tugged at his sleeve, dragging him outside. Li Yi had mouthwash in his mouth as he said unclearly, "Where are we going?" "Don't pull and pull like this. If someone sees us, it won't be good." Two married men pulling at each other in public. What a scandal. Where did the rules of this guy go to? The servants of the Li family stared dumbfoundedly as their Lord Zhu was dragged out of the house and into a horse carriage. Not a single person stopped him, even the guards just stood there and watched, not moving an inch. The people standing outside the door were people they couldn't afford to offend. "Where are we going?" Li Yi wiped his mouth with his sleeve. Having just woken up, he was still a bit groggy. "Mount Han, the glider has made great progress. When the time comes, you can see if there are any areas that can be improved." "You made that thing so quickly?" Li Yi was somewhat surprised at Li Xian's efficiency. Li Xian said, "I borrowed a few craftsmen from the overseer and told them that it was a weapon for the battlefield. They made it in 3 days." It was naturally impossible to test the effects on a grassy slope, so Mount Han, as the mountain closest to the capital, became the best testing ground. Li Xian didn't climb to the top of the mountain. Halfway up the mountain, he had the guards drag out a large box from a carriage behind him and quickly assemble the things inside. It was exactly the same as the blueprint that Li Yi had drawn for him. He had also made some changes to it, but at the very least, it was much better than the large kite from before. On a certain cliff, a guard's face was filled with a tragic expression. Although he had already tested it many times and the parachute bag on his back could guarantee that he wouldn't die even if he jumped off, he still couldn't help but feel nervous when he glanced down the cliff. In the end, the guard still clenched his teeth, clung to the bottom of the fuselage, and with a long run-up, disappeared from the cliff. Seeing a small dot that maintained a certain altitude the entire time and flew off into the distance, Li Xian's face finally revealed an excited expression. Humanity's dream of flying into the sky had been greatly advanced. Li Yi watched as the guard circled a few times in the air before finally landing on the ground. Standing at the bottom of the cliff, he incessantly waved his hand. "Can we go back now?" Li Yi yawned and asked. After waking up in the morning, he had been dragged here without even eating, just to see the guard of the heir's estate fly in a circle in the air. If he had been a little more clear-headed back then, he definitely wouldn't have followed Li Xian here, but would have instead sunbathed in his own courtyard. Go back for what? Li Xian shook his head and said, "Today is the Water and Land Assembly of Cold Mountain Temple. Emingzhu and Xianing are both on the mountain. If I hadn't specifically gone to the Viscount's estate to find you, I would have gone up with them. At the Water and Land Assembly, several virtuous and eminent monks will publicly demonstrate the Dharma, allowing all living beings to feel enlightened and be nourished by the water of Dharma. Many nobles in the capital, including many princesses and princes, will also participate, receiving the Dharma's illumination and the protection of all the gods and Buddhas in the world." In this world, Buddhism truly was flourishing. Even Li Xian spoke of these things in one set after another. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I just want to ask, is there anything to eat up there?" "Yes." Li Xian nodded. "Vegetarian food will be given at every assembly, and there will be many vendors selling food outside the temple. It was not a good habit not to eat breakfast, nor was it a good habit to sleep until 10 o'clock in the morning, because one would be hungry before it was time to eat, and not too hungry when it was time for lunch after breakfast. There were indeed many vendors selling food on the top of the mountain. The Water and Land Assembly would be held for at least 7 days, and there were so many believers coming and going from all over the country. Of course, some small vendors would not let go of this great opportunity, and even the plum forest was occupied. But today their business was destined not to be good. Of course, the nobles in the capital would not crowd with ordinary people, so on the first day of this assembly, the Cold Mountain Temple was not open to ordinary people, so there would be very few ordinary believers going up the mountain today. And those who were used to living a luxurious life would naturally not buy food from the roadside stalls outside because of their status. Except for Li Yi. The steamed bun vendor finally welcomed his first customer of the day, and was so excited that he was about to cry, selling him 2 trays of steamed buns for 5 copper coins. The monk guarding the door saw the customer carrying the steamed buns enter the temple and wanted to stop him, but when he looked up and saw that it was someone that even Master Tan Yin had to come out to see off, he immediately retreated. Anyway, the rules were not made for these nobles, so it was better to avoid trouble. There were eminent monks preaching everywhere in the temple, and Li Yi did not see Rui, Xiaohuan and the others. He felt that if he listened to the old monk preach while eating steamed buns he might be chased out, so he gave up the idea of going in to look for them. The steamed bun stall owner was an honest man and gave a large amount of steamed buns. Li Yi could not finish them alone, and Li Xian did not care to eat them. When he passed it to the guards of the crown prince's residence, he was ignored, but he felt it was a pity to throw it away. At this moment he felt someone patting him on the back. He turned and saw the proud Lolita with her hair in a stunning bun. She handed the paper bag forward. "Do you want steamed buns?" Like teacher, like disciple. As Li Yi's favorite disciple, Princess Xianing clearly had the same taste as her teacher. The princess of the Jing kingdom often seemed to be hungry, and the few steamed buns left by Li Yi were quickly finished by Princess Xianing. The veins on the foreheads of the palace guards and palace maids who followed behind her were about to burst. If not for Princess Yongl's silence, they would have taken down this bold person long ago. "Xianing, so you are here." A young man walked over from behind, followed by several other young people, all of whom had an extraordinary aura. Imperial brother. Seeing the young man, Princess Xianing walked over quickly and smiled. "What did you eat just now?" The young man frowned, took out a clean handkerchief from his bosom, and wiped the corner of Princess Xianing's mouth. "Nothing, nothing." The proud Lolita ran back with a guilty conscience. "Greetings to the King of Shu." The palace guards and palace maids all bowed to the young man. The young man waved his hand, walked up and said to Emingzhu, "There are many people in the temple. Look after Xianing, don't let her run around." Emingzhu nodded, but Princess Xianing twitched her mouth and said, "Who ran around?" The young man smiled and rubbed her head, saying, "Imperial brother still has things to do, so I won't accompany you. You have to listen to Imperial sister." Got it, Princess Xianxia said impatiently. The young man shook his head, glanced at Li Xian and slowly walked away with the people behind him. Only when the few of them had disappeared did Li Yi turn his head to look at Li Xian. He saw that Li Xian's expression was calm. Usually when Li Xian revealed such an expression, it meant that he was not in a good mood. Li Yi asked suspiciously, "Do you have a grudge with the king of Shu?" Chapter 362. It's not really a big grudge. Li Xian looked away from the backs of those people and said, "When I was a child in the imperial palace, the king of Shu was the leader of the princes who bullied me. Also," his voice paused for a while before he continued, "the woman whom he had tried to marry over and over again is now my heir's consort." Li Yi's eyes widened. The hatred of stealing his wife was not a big grudge. It was one of the two biggest grudges in one's life. The king of Shu did not hand him a knife the moment they met, which showed that he had great self-restraint. He could not help but give him a thumbs up. It was never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. The king of Shu probably did not expect that the little prince whom he bullied a decade ago would take revenge in such a way in the future. The king of Shu and his wife are childhood sweethearts? Li Yi was not very curious about other people's affairs, but he was more concerned about his few friends. As a prince of a country he had been rejected time and time again, yet he was still able to persevere. If they really were childhood sweethearts, Li Xian wouldn't have been right to break up the affectionate couple. "I don't think we've met before," Li Xian said after thinking for a while. Li Yi was even more puzzled and asked, "Since they don't know each other, why does he insist on marrying you?" Li Xian glanced at him and said, "When your wife took you up the mountain she didn't know you either, did she?" Li Yi's face darkened. Damn it, what grudge did the king of Shu have with this guy? It had nothing to do with him. Who cares? I won't ask any more. He waved to the arrogant Lolita not far away. "Xianxia, let's go listen to the old monks chanting." The king of Shu is the son of imperial concubine Cui and is the eldest among the princes. According to the rules of the royal family, the eldest son is not the youngest. The empress only has one daughter, Mingzu, and has no other princes. In the harem, imperial concubine Cui is the most respected. Therefore, the king of Shu is the most powerful prince in the competition for the title of crown prince. Li Xian said indifferently, "Although imperial uncle hasn't appointed a crown prince because he doesn't have a legitimate son, the empress hasn't had a son for many years. In the past 2 years, the court has been talking about the position of crown prince. Although the king of Shu has the support of noble consort Cui and the Cui family behind him, if he can marry into the Wang family he will be able to gain the support of two powerful families." Li Yi was a little stunned when he heard that. Did that mean that the young man from earlier, Li Xian's irreconcilable enemy, was actually the best candidate to become the next ruler of the empire? There was an 80 to 90% chance that he would become the successor of the old emperor. According to the old emperor's physical condition, that day would not be far away. The next emperor of the Jing kingdom would ascend the throne in a few years or at least a year or two. However, our crown prince Li Xian had stolen the wife of the next emperor and his wife's family. This was not a big enmity but a big one. The enmity of stealing his wife would affect his plan to seize the throne. Would Prince Ning's family have a good life after the king of Shu became the real emperor? This was not realistic. Fortunately, even though Li Xian was a fool, Prince Ning didn't look like someone who would suffer a loss. Li Yi didn't need to worry about this matter for him. Thinking about it this way, the Wang clan was truly blind. They didn't try to curry favor with such a great potential stock. In another 2 years he would become a relative of the emperor, and a meteoric rise was just around the corner. Why did they have to fall for a coward like Li Xian? Imperial concubine, family, inheritance of the throne, and all these twists and turns of the royal family gave them a headache. Li Yi waved his hand again and said, "Xianxia, let's go and watch the old monk preach." In the nearest Buddhist hall, there was a highly virtuous monk preaching Buddhism. The hall was filled with praying mats and the followers were sitting upright on them. It was unknown if they could understand what he was preaching, but they looked very solemn and focused. "What is this master preaching?" The proud little girl leaned against the door and asked doubtfully. She could only hear the monk mumbling something but she could not make out a single word. "Should lower your voice." The master is preaching the Diamond Sutra. Li Yi made a shushing gesture to her, but his eyes were darting around the Buddhist hall, looking for Rui and the others. The proud little girl looked up at Li Yi, and her big eyes began to twinkle like little stars. The teacher was indeed a teacher. He could even understand such a difficult Buddhist scripture. At this moment, a sigh suddenly came from behind them. Ba, little benefactor Li Yi, Master Huiyan is preaching the Lunga Sutra. The old monk Tan Yin raised his palm and chanted the name of Buddha. He looked at Li Yi and said helplessly. The corner of Li Yi's mouth twitched. This old monk must have a disease that would kill him if he did not expose him. Moreover, he only caught him and tried to expose him. It was said that monks were merciful and left him some face. Wasn't it considered as accumulating merit? To think that he had worked so hard to help him copy so many scriptures, and he even said that he would repay him in the future. Was this how Buddhism repaid kindness? Little benefactor Li Yi, on behalf of Buddhism, I am very grateful for your kindness. When the old monk spoke again, the expression on his face became solemn and solemn. He was indeed a famous master. At first glance he really looked like an eminent monk. It's nothing. Li Yi waved his hand. He was magnanimous and did not intend to fuss over the old monk's act of biting the hand that fed him. It's nothing to you, but it's a great merit to our Buddhism. A smile appeared on Li Yi's face, but he was rolling his eyes in his heart. You yourself said that it's a great merit. Why don't you repay me? Where's the generous repayment? The generous repayment that Li Yi wanted did not come, but another old monk came. A familiar old monk. Several figures walked in from the entrance of the temple. Walking in front was the old monk who asked him for directions on the street yesterday. Beside him was the middle-aged monk with the metal rod. What was different from yesterday was that there were a few more young monks behind the two of them. Yesterday the old monk was still going to Fahua Temple. Today he came to Cold Mountain Temple. However, this was normal. It was said that the officials in the capital were of a higher rank. In fact, the temples in the capital were of a higher rank. All the monks in the world wanted to enter the temples in the capital. When foreign monks came, they would pay their respects. Cold Mountain Temple was the venue of the Water and Land Dharma Assembly. Recently there were countless monks who came here. A monk from Cold Mountain Temple who was in charge of reception had already gone up to greet them. May I know your title, master? A young monk asked with a smile. The old monk in front of him had white eyebrows and beard and an extraordinary bearing. It was obvious that he was an eminent monk. I am Xianxia, the old monk said with a smile. So it's Master Xianxia. The young monk had never heard of this Dharma name. A trace of doubt appeared on his face, but he still asked politely, May I know where Master is from? Where I came from. The old monk still had a smile on his face. As soon as he said that, the young monk's expression changed. The welcoming monks behind him also trembled. Li Yi looked at the old monk with some surprise. Almost everyone in his previous life knew that this was a powerful tool for showing off, but it actually appeared here? The smile on Master Tan Yin's face disappeared. He looked in the direction of the foreign monks and seemed to be deep in thought. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.